Water, Waste and Energy Committee meeting of 11th of February 2025. I declare this meeting open at 9:02 a.m. So a big welcome to our committee members, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Young, Councillor Patterson, Councillor LaCastra and Councillor Doran, and visiting councillors, of which we have a few. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gates, Councillor Tozer, Councillor Martin and Councillor Taylor. Oh, and Councillor O'Neill. Of course, a welcome to our city officers and chambers staff. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded, so we of course welcome those watching from home. So item 1 is our attendance and apologies. There is one committee member apology this morning, which is Councillor Hammel, who is away on business, and we also have received an apology from our stalwart visiting Councillor Fowler, who was unable to join us today, but I am aware that she's mailed through some of her questions through to officers. So can I have a mover to accept those apologies? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Young. All those in favour? Thank you. Moving on to item 2, leave of absence. There are no requested leave of absence. Item 3, confirmation of the minutes. So minutes of the 851 meeting held on the 28th of January 2025 are to be confirmed. Do I have a mover for that motion? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Castra. All those in favour? And that motion is passed. Item 4, conflict of interest declarations. Do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare against any of the items in today's agenda? Excellent. Moving on to item 5, the committee forward planning schedule. So noting this is included as a start item, if there aren't any questions, I'll deal with it as a start item. Excellent. So we have 3 start items this morning. Do I have a request from any councillors to unstart any of those items? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to unstart 6.1 if I could, thanks.
Any more for any more? Okay, so that leaves us with item 5.1, 6.3 and 6.4 still start. Do I have a mover for those items? Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. Seconded, Councillor Castra. All those in favour? And that motion is carried. Okay, so moving on to item 6, we've unstarred 6.1, the Abbott Park Channel Naturalisation Demonstration Project outcome. Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. And with your indulgence, I'd like to actually put a change recommendation up, if I could, on this particular item. And I'll seek a seconder, if I could.
Councillor Doran? So we have a seconder in Councillor Doran. The change recommendation is on the screen. Is there a presentation from officers? No? Before we commence debate, do we have any questions related to the changed recommendation? Councillor Wilkinson.
Chair, again, at your indulgence, is the questions allowed on the actual report itself presented, or is it just simply on the change recommendation as we see it now?
I will accept questions of anything to do with Abbott Park Channel Naturalisation. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. So through you, Chair, just I'd like to seek from city officers in the report, there was no mention to the 2024-25 budget adoption, noting that an existing cost centre item line 10735 did exist, which had 2.2 million listed against it. Can you advise why this wasn't included in the report?
My understanding in terms of funding is that there was an operational budget allocation and that it was also offset by a $2 million revenue. So in essence, the net cost to the city was quite minimal. And effectively, the budget relied on a significant grant fund to actually progress the project.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Again, through you, Chair, to city officers, before the project progressed prior to funding received back in 23-24 budget, did we have an already existing idea on the approximate useful life of this channel? And do we contain an asset register that would detail that kind of information? Just noting that obviously it was a fundamental piece of the report, and given that it's progressed to this stage, I would have thought that we would have an idea of the useful life before it was highlighted multiple times throughout the report.
I can't comment on the previous report, but certainly we do have an asset register, and for that particular capital asset, the existing concrete channel, that's been assessed as having up to a 20-year useful life. That information, I believe, would have been available at that time, should it have been requested.
Just a final question, Chair. There's obviously a clear position, in my view, in this report from officers that this is a good project. Can you perhaps detail specifically for those at home, perhaps, why this is a good project, why we actually pursued it in the first instance, and advise what key strategies for our city this actually does address?
Certainly can, and I'll invite Kathy to expand. But in essence, with these natural solutions, nature-based solutions, in essence, the ability to create more green space, cooling, dealing with increased heat from climate change, beautification, aesthetics, amenity, they are all key drivers around, I think, the benefits for these type of projects. Kathy, would you like to add?
Yep, through the chair. The project itself was identified as one of the key actions from the water strategy 2014 to 20, whatever year last year was, 2020 something. And essentially it identified as part of an integrated natural resilience project, and the idea was that we'd have 2 demonstration projects to show how these things could be done and the additional benefits that would come from those. And part of the original brief was we looked at multiple sites, and Councillor Young said, why can't I have one in my division? Can you go back and have a look? So there was a cross-directorate, multi-criteria analysis to select Abbott Path as the original demonstration project for an integrated solution for stormwater, nature-based walking, improved aesthetics, those sorts of things.
Follow-up, Chair. Thank you, Kathy. And you mentioned that it would be a demonstration project, which then in turn could ultimately lead that with the success of a project like this that we're striving towards, there potentially could be more of those potentially rolled out in the future across our city to deliver better environmental sustainability outcomes, and actually a beautiful way of, I guess, beautifying some of our suburbs in that respect.
Correct. The site also, there's benefits to this site because it was low risk as well, like low risk for flooding, those types of things. And the idea was that this would show the benefits of this type of outcome that could then be rolled out as infrastructure comes to its end of life. We could then not replace it with the standard channel type configuration, but a more naturalised environment that would improve resilience and actually put some more greening around the city.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the confusing parts of this report and recommendation, not the change recommendation, the original recommendation, was that the impression was that there was money in the operating budget, and now obviously, according to the report, we were unsuccessful in securing a grant, and so now it's out. So I guess my question is, was that fully disclosed to Councillor Wilkinson, but also what came first, the project that we thought was a good idea and then the grant funding, or was the project only conceived on the basis that we would apply for a grant and be successful with the grant?
Through the chair, the project came first, and if you, like the councillors that were here in the previous term would recall, the original project cost was around about $2 million. The city would basically put towards the city that we would firm up the costs initially, so get a bit more detailed design to firm up the costs. Then the idea of the grant came along when we thought we could actually, get a better outcome for the city by offsetting the costs with a grant, and so the application for the grant was put in.
Sorry, follow up, please, Chair.
Sure.
Did the project change in scope along that journey from the 2 million to the 3.2?
Through the chair, I might take that one. So, Council will be familiar with our Gateway process for projects. So in essence, there's a concept of a project, which was the original concept, very much illustrative sketch, some high-level benefits. As we progress design, we obviously look at, cross-section performance and firm up. So effectively, we're now at gate 2, which is very typical to all our projects. At that gate 2, every gate's a review, and it effectively checks if the original assumptions and benefits of the project still stack up. The reason, I guess, that's driven the officer's report are threefold at the gateway review. One is the cost increase, as Kathy said, from $2 million to $3.2 million. The confirmation that this is operational cost. This is not a capital project, so it's OPEX bottom line to be funded, because with nature-based infrastructure, it's very difficult under the accounting standards to actually treat that as an asset and capitalise and depreciate that asset. Thirdly, within the budget, there was assumptions around a $2 million grant, which obviously we were unable to pick up. And the third element is around the existing asset having a 20-year remaining useful life. So there's an additional write-down cost of $418,000 on that asset if we effectively demolish it prior to end of useful life and need to effectively write off that remaining written down value. So these are new elements that have been, identified, and hence the conversation around progression through the gate, because it wasn't original scope, original cost, original benefits. There is a change, and this is, I guess, our gateway process in action. When we do have these anomalies, we will come back to committee or council seeking direction.
Councillor Gates, then Councillor Patterson.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm not on this committee, so Councillor Wilkinson will be pleased to know. No, I'm not acting mayor. I don't get a vote. But I well recall this as a demonstration project, and I was vehemently opposed to it when it was first raised because of the length of time and life left in the existing concrete facility. And I recall at the time suggesting that we potentially find a shorter drain that was in worse condition that could be the demonstration project. I think it's even worse now, given the cost escalation and the situation most of our residents find themselves in a cost of living crisis. So I think more than ever we need to be cognizant of spending money appropriately where there is need, and to destroy a drain that has 20 years life left in it on a demonstration project. I mean, the photos we saw at the time were magnificent. I recall it was a Brisbane example, and that's all good and well, but let's not destroy infrastructure that has the capacity of an additional 20 years where ratepayers would not have to be bearing a $3.2 million burden, because clearly has been no support for grant funding. And we all know that $5 million represents a 1% rate rise for residents across the board. So we need to be responsible when we're allocating funds. And for me, this is irresponsible should we progress a $3.2 million project where there's no need.
Just noting that we do have a live motion, I am happy to accept commentary as well, but Councillor Patterson?
I just had a couple of questions. The first one, if this was to proceed, I recognise that it is area fraught with mosquito breeding, and it was noted that native fish would be brought in. How viable do you think that is to make sure that this just wouldn't turn into a mozzie breeding ground?
You mean if we did it?
Through the chair, I guess, through the city's usual, mosquito programs, I guess that would be a consideration. But what we've seen with many of our ponds and wetlands is they do naturally end up with species. We would target putting in native species initially, and that's something we would monitor, through our maintenance regime. But that's probably primarily what we would be doing, is just through monitoring.
Follow up, Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Wilkinson.
So two questions. One, so just through you, so in your opinion, that introduction of those native fish species would be sufficient to make sure this isn't a mozzie? I don't know. Just wanted to understand your thoughts.
Through the chair, I think we don't have the right people to answer that question on the floor here. I think we'll need to come back with an answer if you want to pursue that.
Thank you. And then follow-up question. So if we were to do this, what is the expected, is there a life expectancy, or do you just think that this is something that we really can create as a nature project which is just there for ongoing?
Through the chair, look, my expectation would be that this would be a project that would, once created, would have a maintenance regime, and we would need to maintain this as a natural asset. But I would expect that it would have quite a long useful life because of it's a natural, now become a naturalised asset. But there would be an increased maintenance burden to keep it in good shape.
Councillor Wilkinson, then Councillor Doran, then Councillor Tozer, then Councillor De Castro.
Thank you, Chair. And just touching on the actual attractiveness of grants, especially for this project, given that it's a concept, we've got the concept design. In City Officer's opinion, obviously I'm a supporter in that respect, and it's reflected in the change recommendation today. What would your comments be around the attractiveness of this for potential future grants? Although it was unsuccessful in this instance, what's the prospect future-wise for that?
Through the chair. I actually have got high hopes for this one as being a project that could attract a future grant. Look, it's the city doesn't put up projects for chasing grants that aren't good projects. This is a good project. Look, once we've assessed it under our current criteria, look, it hasn't passed muster at this stage. But if we were to secure a grant, I'd happily support the project going forward.
That was Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back to the question I had earlier around the grant funding and what came first. Are there any other projects in our current infrastructure program that are contingent upon securing grants that maybe we're not aware of? Because Councillor Wilkinson apparently wasn't aware that this was offset against a grant on revenue stream. So is that quite common in terms of our current budgetary situation?
Typically through the budget process, we will identify certainly programs where we think there's an ongoing revenue stream for particularly in the transport space. Typically where we put a project up and we make an assumption around the approval being dependent on or subject to the outcome of, that typically it's good governance to reference that assumption. Yeah. So typically when we're putting up a project, including budget requirements, we will be quite clear on the assumptions around financials. In terms of whole of budget and whether there are other particular items where there's been similar assumptions, I cannot comment on that, and I do see Alex is out there if you did want specific information, but certainly for the infrastructure program going forward, our practice is to list any assumptions around revenue because it's an element around the cost benefit.
Thank you, Director. Chair, I feel as if I feel for Councillor Wilson and his constituents here because he did have the expectation that this wasn't offsetting against a grant, and it would occur to me that maybe the councillor's office might have lent some weight to the grant application with his advocacy if that was the case, and I'm wondering through the chair whether or not it is. Whether or not councillors are able to be furnished with a list of individual projects that are currently requiring grant support within our divisions.
Are you happy to take that on notice, Doctor?
Thank you, Chair.
I've just got Councillor Tozer, then Councillor Castro, and then you're next. Or is it directly related? I'll take it.
I just want to know through you, Chair, if we submit on any item, don't we create a conflict for ourselves as a submitter? So should we support a project in the planning sense, then we create a conflict of interest for ourselves, and I should imagine it would be similar. Councillor Tozer?
I have a separate question, but to comment on Councillor Gates' commentary, I suppose. Yeah, I think the legislation around us providing letters of support would put us in a difficult position, at least a conflict of interest position, were we to Yeah, although I'm not sure whether we did that as divisional councillor, whether like a letter of no objection or a letter of support would just be part of our operational business. We'd have to get some legal advice, but I know that it matters if we provide a letter of objection or a letter of support for a development application. It precludes us from participating in discussion at all. But I'm not sure if the same happens with operational projects. So it's beyond my knowledge. But I have a separate question when you're ready, Chair.
If it's related, Councillor Patterson.
Sorry, just to add, I thought we got quite explicit advice. If it's to apply for a local government grant, then no. But if it's to apply for a state or federal grant, then that's totally fine.
Yeah, so it sounds like we'll require some clarity from General Counsel, which we can seek after the meeting. So I'll move on to Councillor Tozer's question.
So my question first is, what was the grant we went for? Could you tell us about that one?
Through the Chair, it was the Urban Rivers and Catchments Grant.
And so can you just give me some more information about this kind of the scope of what sort of projects were funded under that grant program?
At the time I was not involved in that process, so unfortunately I can't.
Right, so was it a state government or federal government grant?
State.
So the state was giving out money for urban rivers, and was it under the Department of Environment or was it a Department of Natural Resources? What was the department that was offering the grant? Yeah, cool. Cool, thank you. My question is, what's the next project up? So we had a $2.2 million allocation in our cost centre contingent on a grant allocation. Are we going to reallocate that $2.2 million to something else, or is effectively it lapses entirely?
Through the Chair, in my view, it lapses entirely because the net zero to the council was that there was a revenue line, which was the expected grant revenue, and then there was an expense line, which was the expenditure on the project. So those two netted out. So to proceed on the project and spend the expenditure without the revenue coming in is a $2 million different position for the council.
So part two of my question is there projects that sometimes we apply for grants for that don't account for a revenue line in our budget? So we get, does that exist? At the last Governance Committee, there were two matters raised in the budget review that related to a $770,000 allocation from the state government for the Lower Beachmont Community Centre, which I know was accounted for. We had a grant that was budgeted for, but then there was a $1.5 million allocation for the Mudgeeraba Aquatic Centre, which I'm not sure if we did or didn't. And my question is, what do we do when we get a grant we didn't expect? Is it the same thing we do when we get, or we fail to get a grant we did expect?
Through you, Chair. So there are certain projects like this one where we know up front that we're applying for the grant and continuing with the project is dependent on receiving it. There are other ones where we apply after the fact because more funding becomes available on a periodic basis. That's obviously a favourable impact to the budget because we were doing them anyway.
So in the area of drains and environmental projects like this one, before full council, could you provide us any advice about any grants we've received that were unaccounted for in the last financial year or current financial year? That'd be great. If you could do that. There may be none, but it'd be great to know.
I'm close to 100% sure it's none, but I will check.
Thank you.
If that's from you, Councillor Tozer. Councillor Castro, thanks for being patient. You're up.
Yeah, thank you. Just two questions, Madam Chair. The first one is, there's $2.2 million that was allocated and that we approved in the budget to be put aside, but it says that the project cost has doubled from 1.6 to 3.2. So the question was, why was 2.2 in the budget to start with? Because it seems like when we talk about it doubling, there's already another 600 sitting there anyway. So,
through the Chair, there's probably two main parts to that. One is that the project costing that we referred to is 2 years old, and I think a number of times in here we've spoken about the escalation in construction costs. The second part is that the project as first envisioned was on the western side of, apologies, I forgot the name of the road that splits Abbott Park on the western side of the road. But the project was then considering the eastern side as well. So there's two parts to it. One is a scope increase and one is the escalation in costs.
Sorry, so through you, Madam Chair, so when you say the scope increase, are you talking about the, on page 17, it talks about an extra 54
Correct, yes.
metres, right? So therefore, the other question would be then is, if that scope increase was removed and that 54 metres was taken off, what would the cost be now with the escalation in price? So if we're now saying it's going to be, what are we saying it's going to be now, 3.2? So if we didn't do that extra 54 metres or 57, whatever it was in the report, what would be the likely cost at today's prices? Because I think it was 290. I think I highlighted here. It was 290 metres. It is. So this is on page 16. So 290 metres of existing drain, and then it says includes an extra 54. So I'm just wondering, when we're talking about there's already 2.2 in the budget which we've approved. If we didn't do that 54, it wouldn't be 3.2, would it? What would it most likely be?
Through the chair, apart from pro-ratering an answer down based on length, I couldn't give you a better answer than that on the fly. So we can come back to you and estimate that cost.
Yeah, thank you, because it just makes me think that we're arguing that we need 3.2, and the fact is we've got 2.2 that we've approved, and if we take the 54 off, for instance, if we did that, it may not be anywhere near 3.2. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Castro. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. And I think this could be my last. Oh, yeah, it could be my last. Just in relation to the unsuccessful grant, it was my understanding that there was an element of a council contribution for that grant application anyway. Can you confirm that? And if you're permitted to do so, can you advise how much?
Through Chair, sorry, Councillor, I didn't quite understand the question.
So just in relation to the former grant that we were unsuccessful with, my understanding from the information I've gathered in building to today was that there was an element of a council contribution to securing that funding as well. I'm just wondering if you can confirm that for me, and also, if permitted to do so in the open forum, advise how much.
If I understand the premise of the question correctly, Council had assumed that the project was $2.2 million at the time of budget development last year, and we'd have put in a $2 million grant. So the net cost to Council was the $200,000, the difference between the two. And I suppose we need to also account that there was going to be a accounting treatment on the for writing off the cost of the asset as well. So there would have been the 480, but the $418,000 that was still the written down value of the asset as well would have also hit the books.
Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Wilkinson?
Chair, not really, to be honest, given I've got detail from other officers that note a contribution, and I don't know in what context it was applied as such. That's why I just sought clarity. But yeah, it doesn't really answer the question that I believe I have other details around, that's all.
Through the chair, not trying to be misleading, I don't know the answer to your question. I'll have to find it.
Thank you. Councillor Doran was next.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to understand if I want to clarify if I understand Councillor Gates' comments earlier correctly. This particular location, it wasn't chosen based on a needs, but based on one that might potentially suit the regeneration rather than any dilapidation with the asset. Is that correct?
So through the chair, when we're actually looking at a project like this, the carrying capacity of the drain is actually one of the key things that needed to be considered. So Alex, I'll ask you to jump in here shortly, but one of the key things is the actual cross-section of the drain. When we consider a lot of our other urban channels, they actually can't, because what we're going to do here is lay back the design and have a very open profile. We couldn't do that in a lot of other locations, so there weren't many places across the city where we could consider this.
But it's not so much, Chair, doesn't sound correct, Mark, it's not so much anything wrong with the asset in its current form. It was just this was a suitable location for this.
Absolutely, Councillor. This asset is performing its function at the moment, and it is more was an opportunity to actually pursue this type of project for the city as part of the water strategy at the time.
So I guess that, Chair, probably, and I'll seek clarification that explains. When I was reading this report, I was unsure as to why we're doing a work on this particular channel. But now we're choosing not to, and it doesn't have to be done for another 10 to 20 years. Is that essentially what you're saying, is because it wasn't a needs assessment, but rather a suitable location to trial this particular change?
Through the chair, correct. Yeah, like this is a suitable location to trial this. To Councillor Wilkinson's earlier question about the veracity of the project, like it is a good project. It would be a great outcome to have a channel like this in here. But I think the right time now that the city has been unsuccessful and the cost of the city it was going to incur would be down the track, and particularly if we can either at the time the asset starts to fail and it is in good condition at the moment, or if the city was able to secure a grant in the future that would help us be able to afford this project.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. And I was a supporter of this project when it came to Council last. Just a question, probably through the Chair, to Councillor Wilkinson. You say that there could be a contribution from Division 7. How much are you looking at? Because I think it might be prohibitive through a LAW.
Thank you for the question. It's something that I would certainly work with city officers, as it mentions that in Part B, the balance funds required to deliver the project to be determined as Council's 2025-26 budget deliberations. It would be at that time that I would work with city officers to say, I'm happy to put some skin in the game. I'm happy to contribute this amount. It may not even be in 1 year. It might be across 2 years. I'm open to that consideration. It's just also then factoring in, I know that I couldn't deliver this purely from my law budget side of things. So it's looking at that, I guess, and making sure that it's clear to the room, to the councillors and to the city officers, I'm happy to put skin in the game because I think that this is a very merit-worthy project.
I agree it's a worthy project, and I think that we should still be pursuing whatever grants. Do they come up regularly, these particular grants?
We can take that one on notice, but typically most of these programs are annual. So I guess in terms of the way the resolution is currently worded, officers could pursue and provide advice on what's currently out there and the timing of such and the quantum likely.
If there are no further questions, I will just clarify the situation that we are dealing with a change recommendation, which means if it is unsuccessful, we'll revert to the officer's recommendation. So with that, I will invite the mover of the change recommendation to open debate.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst there are elements within the officer's original recommendation today for item 6.1 that I would support, such as the continuance to seek grant funds to deliver this project, I believe that there are other components that seek to place this environmentally sustainable initiative on the shelf for potentially decades to come. So in light of that, I'll be urging councillors today to support my change recommendation that not only delivers a project that has the concept design ready to go, delivers on some of our core council strategies, like our water strategy, our natural city strategy, and our climate resilience and sustainability strategy, but also sets the benchmark for how we can deliver renaturalisation projects across our existing stormwater drains throughout the city into the future with an actual physical example. I'll focus my debate primarily on 3 points. First, a unique future-led project. This project is unlike any other. It would be the first of its kind in the city and could set an incredible example of how our city's future stormwater channel renaturalisations could look, noting the Brisbane City LGA success with similar projects, namely Hammel Park. While I'm sure you've all read the report, I want to take a moment to highlight the key elements confirmed through the concept design. minor improvements to flooding in Crampton Court, great local win, retention of all high-value trees, ensuring environmental preservation, no impacts on other services, mitigating any disruptions, no net worsening to flooding in the area, which is also very critical, and it was designed with the crime prevention through environmental design principles, ensuring the design promotes both safety and ecological integrity. I emphasise these points because they demonstrate the strong merits of this project, merits that, in my opinion, far outweigh the original officer's recommendation before us today. This is a prime example of what kind of integrated design we should be striving for as a city. While the primary asset in focus is a stormwater drain, the project delivers other far-reaching benefits, including stormwater quality improvements, enhancing environmental health, increased visual amenity and landscaping, creating opportunities for adventure, discovery and education about our water cycle, an estimated 100 new trees and approximately 10,000 native grasses and shrubs contributing to urban cooling, improved water edge accessibility and additional crossing points, and a design that supports native fish colonisation to help regulate mosquito populations naturally. With all these positive merits included in the report, I was disheartened to think about waiting potentially decades to see this realised, not only just for my local community, but for our city. Secondly, budget, funding considerations and timing. Some clarity. This project was already adopted into the 24-25 budget in Cost Centre 10735, as noted in my change recommendation. During previous budget discussions, before I communicated anything publicly, I specifically raised this project with the former CFO. It was the only OPEX item I explicitly referenced in my communications once I was assured it was confirmed within the budget and I was given the thumbs up on my comms. It was some months later that I was informed that the project was heavily reliant upon securing a grant, something I was previously unaware of, which also hadn't been mentioned to me during the former budget adoption. While I fully support leveraging grants for projects delivery, upon looking into this further, it's also my understanding that council contribution was already allocated as part of the grant application as well. In that light, and in my opinion, the city contribution was measured, shows that they were serious about this project, and further reinforces that there was an existing funding towards this project. Unfortunately, the report did not reflect my understanding or note the former budget adoption around this project, which I believe didn't reflect the whole picture for councillors' awareness. As we've heard even today, the project came first, not the grant. There was also a lot of mention around the remaining useful life of the existing concrete surface drain, and whilst I appreciate that, we'd already made movements to see this project come to fruition, even before I was elected. Surely we as a city already knew the stormwater channel's approximate use of life, which I understand we would have now, and that didn't stop us from progressing this project previously. More concerning to me is that we're approving strategic documents that raise renaturalisation of stormwater channels, and yet here we are with a project, the only project of this currently for the city that was strategically selected, ready to move forward, and instead of pushing go, we're hesitating, which could result in these strategies not seeing the desired outcomes, which we're setting, or collapsing due to the time set for the strategies finishing before this project even gets to the table. Finally, a bold environmental choice. Let's be bold in making positive environmental decisions that not only improve our city's drainage system, but also align with our broader strategic objectives, like our natural city strategy, specifically relating to increasing our urban tree canopy and sustainable urban park planning, as well as our climate resilience and sustainability strategy. Noting a key component of this strategy looks at LGIP funding targeting flood resilience through the integration of parks and stormwater channels. Our city is known for its have-a-go spirit, and today I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this change recommendation. This is an opportunity to set the stage for future renaturalisation of stormwater channels across our city, but it has to start somewhere. If we let this project go and stall after so much progress, it risks being shelved for decades, and that would be a wasted opportunity. So let's not waste today. Let's press the green go button and allow the green behind the gold to flourish and deliver on our strategic directions.
Thank you for that emphatic opening. Councillor Young.
My question relates to item 2 here, which says that there was, number 3, which says that there was money allocated in the budget. No, it is number 2. Well, no, it's really number 4. Okay, so 4A talks about the existing 2.2 million in cost centre 10735. I just want clarification on that because my understanding is 10735 comprises $200,000 of actual funds and $2 million of hoped for grant funds. So the $2.2 million in my mind doesn't exist. I just want some clarification, please. Well, I'm not going to vote on something I don't understand.
Yeah, given it may assist Councillor Young's vote, I will allow the question and we will go back to debate.
Through the chair, the net funding variance and the bottom line cost to the city, I guess, was offset by the $2 million grant. So, I guess from a budgeting perspective, there was a net cost to the city of the $200,000. In essence, if we look at bottom line impact, it is actually a pivot from 200,000 to 3.2 plus the written down costs, which is also an OPEX expense, which in my view should be attributed to the project. So you're comparing a $3.6 million impact. But there may have been an oversight in the original report and the budget discussions.
So in my opinion, Chair...
So would you like to speak against, Councillor Young?
I'll have to. 4A is an incorrect representation of the facts, and I don't think that should be supported because it's just clearly not right. There was 200,000 allocated and 2 million hoped for, which was a provision. It wasn't an allocation. So the premise is wrong, and unfortunately I can't support that. Look, I did speak with Councillor Joe yesterday, and I was happy to support the notion of this project in the context of a citywide focus. So I suggested to him that he seek that we allocate money in future budgets, like a minimum of $1 million for this kind of naturalisation projects across the city, wherever it might be, and that the officers ultimately will present us a list of projects that have been through some kind of assessment process, and that we can endorse that list and go ahead with it over the years to come. So we've got a genuine commitment to achieving these outcomes that Councillor Wilkinson has identified as being desirable, and I support that and agree with that. But I'm not particularly fussed about Abbott Park or any particular park, and I don't see any justification in $3 billion for it. And I think the premise here is wrong in that it seems to present that $2.2 million was sitting there hot in the budget, ready to be spent, because it wasn't. It might have appeared like that. It clearly wasn't. And on the basis of that, I'm sorry, Councillor Wilkinson, I can't support your motion.
That was Councillor Young speaking against the motion. Can I have someone speaking for the motion?
What can I ask?
I'm just going to clarify if I can.
Yeah.
Chair.
Councillor Wilkinson.
The motion was worded in consultation, obviously, with the correct EGM and the team. So the way they've worded it, I believe, is just how it had to be reflected as part of the way it was possibly worded in the previous budget. So that's why it's not by any means, and I certainly don't take it as what Councillor Young has said, that it's not trying to mislead. It's simply worded as such for what it was previously positioned as. Is that correct? If I can seek that clarification.
Through the chair, I might pass to Alex on that. I guess what we're referencing now is effectively the budget allocations around expenditure and revenue, but I'm not sure about the particular wording.
Through you, Chair, in the next budget review, we're going to have to take, in order for the budget to balance, we'll need to take the $2 million of revenue and the matching $2 million of expense out of the budget, which will just leave $200,000 in the cost centre.
Just for clarity for today's resolution, that's at a future budget that we're not currently at. So the way we had to word for this is my understanding is that's how it was presented at the last budget. So therefore, that's how it was worded in today's resolution.
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
In the interest of procedural fairness, because we accepted a question from someone speaking against, I will now throw back to you for reasons for and Councillor.
Sorry, I'm still confused. Sorry. So the budget presented that there was 2.2 million.
Section 3 tells you what was in the budget. $2 million and the $2 million zeroed each other out. There was only $200,000.
Sorry, gotcha. Yeah, now I've got it. Yeah, now I've got it. Okay.
There was $2
Yes, yeah, now I've got it.
Yeah.
I've got it. Thanks.
And there's an extra $1 million needed.
Yep.
So with that clarification, we are still on a speaker 4. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. I am comfortable supporting this recommendation, and I note that it doesn't expressly state that we are committing and proceeding with it, but it doesn't stop it like the officer's recommendation did, which was just basically we're closing the thing and we're not going to consider it anymore. I note, and just had it confirmed because I couldn't quite remember, that in our rigorous risk profiling that this council just established for the city, we had identified that nature-based and conservative focuses, conservation focuses, required a conservative risk profile. So that means that we're committed to it, not at a point, it's not an area that we're looking to skimp on, it's an area that we are committed to, and I do see that this is one avenue for it. If the recommendation was, yes, we're committing $2 million of council money right now and we're saying yay, then I probably would not feel quite so comfortable about it, but that's not what this recommendation says. It says that we are going to look at it within the budget, we are going to actively explore for further funding, and that we're not stopping the project. I really appreciated Councillor Young's points, and probably if there was potential, I would have probably gone for a recommendation that opened it up, given looking at it from a more broader perspective. But given it's not explicit right now, I'm happy to do that. I don't want to see this project ended right now. There is too much merit that's been presented by officers on it. And we do have a new state government who came in with significant commitments and promises of investing in nature-based economy, and this may be an element of that as well. So happy to support this recommendation. Thank you.
Anyone speaking against? Councillor Gates.
Thanks very much, Chair. I don't know how anyone can support this recommendation because, as Councillor Young points out, it's factually incorrect. There is not. We've been told over and over again this morning that there is not $2.2 million in the budget, that there was an allocation with a matching revenue for income. So there's $200,000 in the budget, and we're contemplating this morning adding another $3.4 million of ratepayer funds to destroy a perfectly functioning concrete drain on a beautification demonstration project. I don't want to undermine the value of such a project, because I think anyone who saw the visuals that were presented when we first saw this project would agree that what we saw was absolutely beautiful and had great environmental benefit. But to suggest it's a desirable thing for our city at this point in time to destroy a drain with 20 years life left that is functioning perfectly, I think is not how we should be doing business at this particular time. If we had a different position across the board at the moment, where people were all doing well, it's just not the case at the moment. People are really struggling, and I think we need to be really mindful of the allocations that we make and that they are part of our core business. Well, drainage obviously is, but we've got a well-functioning drain. So I'm sorry, Councillor Wilkinson, that I won't be supporting this when it gets to full council. I don't get a vote today, but I think this is one that we could continue to pursue with opportunities for grant funding and look at again once we're successful. I mean, if all the work's been done, then that's, in my view, the logical thing to do. And perhaps a change where we continue to pursue grant funding might be something that can be considered at full council.
Thank you, Councillor Gates. Somebody to speak for the motion? Councillor Wilkinson, would you like to close?
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief because I appreciate all the councillors' discussion and deliberation on this particular one today. Again, I would just highlight the strengths and the merits that we've contained within this report and the fact that this is, as we've heard from City Office today, it is a great project. I would also note that even with and I take on board my council colleagues' comments around the actual wording in this particular recommendation. Now, again, as Councillor Patterson alluded to, this simply just doesn't kill a project. This simply allows it to continue to move forward with consideration of future budget allocations, which is exactly what it says there. And by no means, and I've said it very clearly in even my opening debate, I'm happy for us to pursue grant funding. In fairness, I would love to see grant funding put towards this that we can actually offset, which again is highlighted in the recommendation there. So I would encourage councillors to support this. It is far more than just a beautification project. It is actually delivering on things like our strategic directions that we have been setting as a council. And I think we should be delivering on things we're saying we're going to do. So I urge you to support this. It has a fantastic merit and we'll see where it lands.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. So with that, we will take the vote on the changed recommendation. All those in favour? Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Patterson, all opposed? Councillor Young, Councillor Castro, Councillor Doran. So that motion is, or recommendation is unsuccessful. That means we will revert to the officer's recommendations. We'll bring that one up on the screen. Given we're looking at a different recommendation now, if there are any final questions, I'll accept them before opening debate. No further questions on the new one. Councillor Castro?
Sorry, questions on the original officer's recommendation?
Correct.
No, not a question. No, sorry.
Okay, I'm happy to move that one. Do I have a seconder?
I was just wondering if you would add a 3. Regarding referring to Councillor Young's point of doing a more broader whole of city exploration of this. Is that something that's required, or is it?
Have you got some? I'm happy to accept that as a potential addition to the recommendation. If you want to quickly prepare some words, and we'll throw them over to the secretary.
I was going to say I'm going to do something by the time we get to full council, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Taylor.
I'm not on the committee, but I just want to ask a quick question about the current recommendations. I just want to understand, if the project's closed, how can we consider grant opportunities in the future if it's been put aside? How do we have that ability to still consider?
Thanks for that question, Councillor Taylor.
Through the Chair, that's a fairly low cost that we would just absorb within our current cost centre and have people actively looking at that. We are quite active in the pursuit of grants. We have a pretty well-established process here with the grant opportunities being flagged to officers, and if anything comes up that would be appropriate for this, we would put the project in. Because the project is quite mature, the actual effort to actually make another grant submission is low.
Just through the chair, I might just add it from a governance perspective. If we were successful in a grant, we'd bring that report back for assessment through one of the quarterly budget reviews. So if there was a considerable grant secured, subject to some offset funding from the city, we would bring that back for consideration and make any adjustments as approved through the quarterly budget process.
Sorry, just follow up. So basically, even though it's closed, it still sits on our books as an opportunity for the future.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. And noting that you've moved the recommendation, I would like to see if you would consider adding to 2C that city officers keep the divisional councillor informed of any grants that have been applied for or knocked back or secured or something along those lines.
Would be very happy to have that inclusion. Thank you, Councillor Doran.
So, yeah.
Councillor Castro.
Yeah, you know, just following on from Councillor Taylor there, is there, because it is confusing, I mean, is there any need for to actually be there, that it be closed? Because I understand where Councillor Taylor's coming from there, because if we are, and this is the thing, you know, I was originally going to support Councillor Wilkinson's motion based on exactly what Councillor Patterson said, the fact that, you know, we're not signing off on anything, we're just keeping it there if we can get the grant funding. This basically is still saying the same thing. It's just, but that wording there, that the project be closed, yeah, is there really any need for that? Can't we just say that we continue to monitor the condition, blah blah blah, and take that out? Because it's very confusing. That way, it's really not that different to Councillor Wilkinson's motion anyway, because it means that, you know, we're still looking at it, and we haven't killed it dead. But that looks like we have, and then it sort of contradicts itself. What if you change it to?
May I ask the ramifications of having an open project with no budget allocation towards it? Do we have examples of that is sitting open, ready to go for when we do receive a grant?
Through the chair, there would be examples. I guess for this particular project, we've gone through a gate to concept design. If we did get approval to proceed, we'd progress that through to a design that's ready to go to market, go to tender, and a delivery. So I guess we are not progressing that. So in essence of the close or the pause, we would as officers not progress that project any further. But in terms of the terminology close, we would have to adjust the budget in March to effectively show the dropout of the $2 million grant not being pursued. So that will have the net impact bottom line budget should the project remain. And we would also be pausing any efforts to progress it to the next gate.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. Just in a quiet consultation with Councillor Castro, would changing the word closed, this is to Director through you, Chair, would changing the word closed to paused cause any issues within the administration? And
no, through the Chair, not from my perspective. No.
Chair, I hope respectfully submit that as a change to your motion to potentially, to give effect to the project remaining active, and then to complement the city's efforts to seek grant funding to accommodate the costs for the project as a compromise that could be suitable.
Terrific, and I am happy to accept that wording change. Are there any further questions before I open debate?
Oh, actually, we haven't got a second yet.
Oh, sorry, I need a second. Thanks, Councillor Doran. So if there are no further questions, we have an amendment to the original officer's recommendation on the screen. We've already had some lengthy question and debate period about an alternative change recommendation offered by the divisional councillor, whom I definitely empathise with the situation that has occurred, where it would seem there's a separate conversation to be had about the contingency of budget allocations on grants, and perhaps divisional councillors not being aware. And I think that conversation definitely needs to occur separate to this, because I certainly heard and understood Councillor Wilkinson's frustrations. It's a reluctant move of this recommendation, because I think the project is fantastic, and I would absolutely be behind a citywide strategy that sought to introduce these as our infrastructure reaches its end of life. However, given the escalated costs for delivery, the non-critical nature of the project, with the current infrastructure having another 10 to 20 year life expectation, I can't support going down this avenue without a significant external funding source. I note Councillor Patterson's reference to the state government and their commitment. So I'm really hopeful that we do see some additional grants in this space, and hopefully we'll be competitive because we've got the designs ready to go. It's great to see that change in wording from close to pause will signal to the community that we are definitely open and committed to delivering this. We just need the funding to make sure that it doesn't unfairly impact ratepayers. So with that, I will offer the floor to anyone speaking against the recommendation. No, and I will use that as my close. Pardon me, Councillor Gates.
I'm sorry, I don't want to speak against. I just want to understand, if I might ask through you to the Director, will that funding be able to be removed, the funding and the revenue from the budget, or will it still sit there with a paused project?
Through the chair, I will defer to Alex that he's in the room, but my understanding would be that the next review we would be effectively retaining the 200,000.
The 200 would be retained and the other would...
Through you, Chair, that's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you, that's fine.
And so that was also my close. So with that, I will take the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Young? Okay. That recommendation is carried. Thank you, officers. Given that I anticipate the next one will be a lengthy one, I'll propose that we take a 10-minute comfort break and we'll return at 10:15. Just to advise, live streaming has been turned back on. Welcome back, councillors. We will be moving on with item 6.2, the Waste Network Plan. I welcome Director Alex Graham and her team of waste experts, Chris, Christy and Maried. So thank you and welcome. Before we commence with the presentation, I do wish to advise that upon consultation with officers, I will be proposing a change recommendation, and given it may change or influence the lens in which we see the presentation, I have asked that it be presented on the screen for viewing prior to the presentation. So I'll give you all a moment to have a read through, and then we'll allow Chris to take us through the presentation. Correct, so the one on the screen now. Yes, worked with the officers, yep.
So, will Mr. O effectively be speaking to your changed motion, or?
So you'll note that it's very similar with just a significant change in point 4. So the presentation won't differ drastically. It's still sort of the same. It's just a difference in where we'll end up at the end of committee, perhaps.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, it would have been good if we'd actually had this through the break so we could have actually digested it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I apologise. Yeah, that would have, I know I should have had them printed, so lesson learned. I'll make sure I have that done next time. Thank you, Councillor Castro. Sorry, Councillor O'Neill.
On there.
Unless the proposed closure is actually A.
You've got number 4, 3A and 3A to 3F, but it only goes to E.
Yeah, it does make sense as it is. You just need to take the F off the 4 and make it E instead.
Yeah.
What I might ask if we could get from Chambers supporters have a printed copy distributed to each of the councillors so they can have it in front of them for the presentation. Also, if I may, thank you. Yeah.
Excuse me, Chair, could we have highlighted what's altered on there? Is that possible?
Oh, wrong. Yeah. Yeah, they had to. She lifted it up and reset it, disconnected everything, and it's like a first IA on a gun. Pull the trigger.
Okay.
So to summarise, the key difference here is that it's a noting of the report and then a deferral to consider the items as part of the 25-26 budget deliberations. But I will get you paper copies so you can see it side by side with the report recommendations.
So can we ask questions on that now?
So we'll go through the presentation and then we can definitely ask questions on both the original report recommendation and this recommendation. And we can kick off. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Councillor. Good morning, councillors. This item represents another element of our ongoing work to ensure a financially viable and sustainable and compliant waste business. And that work is occurring in a rapidly changing environment in the waste industry, including the significant and growing impacts of the state waste levy, cost escalations and difficulties in increasing our recycling rates. Today's element focuses on the WRC network. It looks at some options to increase the resource recovery rates, support financial sustainability of the waste commercialised business unit, while continuing to deliver appropriate customer service levels and potentially fairer charging for our customers. I thank you for working through what is a fairly detailed report with a lot of data and a lot of appendices in it. And I appreciate there'll be some strong community views and interest on the items that we're talking about today. So the presentation is simply an overview of the key elements of the paper, and a copy of those slides are in front of you, together with a copy of the Towards Zero Waste to Landfill plan, which is our guiding strategy for the waste business for the next 3 years, for some demonstration of how this paper and the options presented in it aligns with that. In terms of the key elements that I'd like to present today is some quick background, the current network, and some South East Queensland benchmarking when it comes to waste and recycling centres or transfer stations, or TIPs as they're sometimes referred to, but we really do refer to them as waste and recycling centres with a highlight on the recycling element. I'd like to talk about community engagement and some of the customer utilisation metrics associated with the WRCs. Talk about and unpack some drivers for change, outline some potential changes, which are around access charges and site changes, and then hand back to Council for consideration of next steps. In terms of our current network and some South East Queensland benchmarking, the city owns a portfolio of waste and recycling assets, including a large portfolio of waste and recycling centres, landfills, and including a materials recovery facility, so a MRF at Carrara, which is operated by Visy. 1 million customers were serviced by those WRCs last year. And importantly, that number dropped by about 500,000 from the previous year. So we're seeing a drop in utilisation despite increases in population, and I can talk a little bit more about that as we move through the presentation. In terms of current services of that WRCs and the related ones, we have 25 recyclable streams that we capture at those WRCs, as well as the general waste and mixed waste, which is going to landfill. But importantly, parallel services which deal with those bulky items include the bulky curbside service for eligible customers, so the Blue Bag program, as well as the Green Organics curbside services and the expansion of that with about 132,000 240-litre wheelie bins now out in the community. I raised that because that is one of the drivers behind the drop in visitation to our WRCs, with the expansion by 70,000 in last financial year of those bins. We have provided customers with an opportunity to deal with that waste stream at their door rather than having to self-haul to our facilities. This is included, and there's a lot of data on this included in the report itself, but the 3 line items, or the 3 rows, I think are worth highlighting, is the annual waste rates charge, and I have touched on this in previous budget discussions last year, or late last year and earlier this year. The City of Gold Coast has one of the lower and certainly lower than average annual waste utility charge, which is the line item on the rates notice, which is revenue for the waste commercialised business unit. Comparing like for like is a little difficult. We have a really complex business. We have our hinterland, so our haulage rates, our number of WRCs, and the nature of our geography with that north-south strip and our Stapleton landfill, which is where all our waste bins go to, the curbside collections go to, means that our cost base is a lot higher than comparative organisations. South East Queensland Council is listed on that. Probably the ones that we can compare ourselves more reliably is Brisbane City Council. We are second biggest waste utility in Australia behind Brisbane, and also potentially Ipswich and Logan, though they don't have those hinterlands that I've just mentioned. The other line item, which I've touched on, the one below that one, is the number of WRCs in our city. We have 11 at the Gold Coast. Brisbane has 4. And you can see the range, but we certainly are the outlier in terms of the number of facilities that we do have. Some of those other councils really put a focus on large, central and more elaborate facilities. We have a portfolio of small, a couple of large ones, our premium sites, for example, at Reedy Creek and Mollendina, which offer full services, and then smaller ones where those services and opportunities for councillors diminish. customers diminish. The other element, obviously, given the nature of this paper, is those access charges. So the third row from the bottom, you can see the range of approaches councils take in South East Queensland, with free entry for Redlands and the Scenic Rim, with the balance, a mixture of charging with or without vouchers. That's fairly consistent across Australia, major cities across Australia, and I'm not sure if you've had the experience of bringing a guest and running them through a WRC from Sydney or Melbourne or the other states or Geelong. They typically pay a gate fee at those facilities. In terms of some of the community engagement and the customer metrics that have occurred, the most recent community engagement that we undertook related to waste and resource recovery was associated with our Towards Zero Waste to Landfill plan, which Council endorsed in December last year. And that's our strategic document which sets the course of our other initiatives, and we've done that for a 3-year window. That community engagement was a Have Your Say and a range of other engagement activities as part of that one. We received over 4,500 responses. That was the second most responded to community consultation that Council conducted last calendar year, and demonstrates the interest that our community does have in waste and resource recovery. A couple of highlights from that one. 92% of customers that provided that feedback said that more recycling options would help them achieve emissions targets, or in essence, we're looking to be able to recycle more things, which is not surprising. 57% noted that they wish to only pay for the waste that they create. 31% reported that they visited the WRC 2 to 3 times a year. And 28% once or not for all. That's a little bit different to what our data suggests at those facilities, which indicates that about 46% of our customers attend, or residents attend, once per year, and 30% don't visit at all. And 81% say paying less for recycling rather than landfill. Landfill waste would help them achieve the state waste targets. So again, we're in an environment where we have national and state targets for recovery rates, which is really about resource recovery rather than sending that material, which is at the other end of the waste hierarchy, which we try and avoid, with that material just being lost to landfill, and then assuming the costs and ongoing management of those landfills even after 20 to 30 years after they close. In terms of our some metrics of our existing portfolio of our mainland WRCs, what we're trying to understand as part of that analysis was really around that efficiency cost per customer. So there's a couple of takeaways I'd suggest from that table, which is unpacked in, or detailed at least, in the paper itself. Mollendina and Reedy Creek, our larger ones, are fairly efficient, and that's to the nature of the footprint, the economies of scale that we can offer there. Currumbin represents our highest cost per customer at $15.73 per customer, which is 1.8 of our total customer base across the council, across the city. And you will see those smaller charges around Numbin and Springbrook, which really represents the unstaffed nature of those sites as well.
Chair,
so,
could I ask a question just about the acronyms used?
Certainly, Councillor Dozer.
Chris, could you help me understand what, just because we're on camera, like what the resource recovery rate percentage is? Just explain it as if I'm a child, and also what MSW is under annual visitation.
Sure, I'll touch on one, and I may well ask my colleagues to unpack those. The resource recovery rate is the volume of material that comes in, and we get this data from audits. So we go and pick up those bins, spread it out at a landfill, and actually weigh those different streams. So, for example, if you look at Jacobs Well, we have a resource recovery rate of 40%. So 40% of the material coming in there is recovered. Whereas Reedy Creek or Mollendina, we're able to capture a greater portion of the stream that's coming in the front door. So we bring, let's say, 100 kilos in the front door. At Mollendina, 63 kilos of that are captured as resource recovery, and 40% Jacobsville. I will throw to my colleagues.
Meaning it's able to be recycled or reused? Or
Yes. If I could, Madam Chair, Murray.
Correct. Through the chair, Councillor Tozer, yes, so another word for resource recovery rate is really recycling rate. So when we talk about the recycling rates up there, we're looking at cardboard, scrap metal, batteries, bottles, cans, containers, glass, those types of materials that are recycled, so diverted from landfill.
So, for instance, in Springbrook, 37% of all the things brought to the waste transfer station are recyclable.
That's correct.
Right. That helps me. Thank you. And the other question I had was just that, what does MSW mean?
is it recyclable or are recycled?
Recycled.
So that's the success rate, you might say.
Yes.
37%.
That's correct.
So you've got separate bins for paper and plastics, and then you've got your general waste. So you take all of that into account and you go, yeah, of all material that's come in here, 30 whatever % is being recovered, being recycled. That's our success rate.
So the takeout for this is that the bigger centres at Mollendine and Reedy Creek result in much better recycling outcomes than the smaller centres where they're localised, people go and drop off in their local neighbourhood.
That's correct, Councillor, and that a couple of factors go into that. One is the facilities at those larger ones with Recycled Street, staffing there that can assist, and also the portfolio of, say, at Reedy Creek and Mollendine, those 26 or 25 streams are captured there with some of our smaller ones. We just don't have the capacity to put in those separate bins and things.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct. And through the chair again, just following on what Chris has said, there's more capacity at the larger centres to accommodate more bins. So, for example, at Reedy Creek and Mollendine, we can capture more items than we can at Currumbin and Springbrook, for example.
Right, so because we can't actually accept certain things at the smaller centres, the resource recovery rate is higher at the bigger centres because we actually have more things we can collect, or a diverse mix of things we can collect.
It's the space for bins, and I guess the number of staff that we have on site, and the larger number of recyclables that we provide on site to capture.
Got it.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's also the actual design of the facility. So if you've been to Reedy Creek or if you've been to Mollendine, the recycling area and the landfill area are completely separate.
Yes.
The customer has to get in their car and move from one point to another. If you go to Merrimack or if you go to Helensvale, you've got a lane and there's recycling on one side and there's waste on the other, and the customer isn't forced to separate those materials as much.
Right. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, the people of Reedy Creek very much appreciate their main transfer station as well. Division 9's a big area. Just MSW, that was the only other part of my question.
Municipal solid waste. So municipal solid waste, so that's the material that goes to landfill and comes out of, for example, the curbside bins, the red-littered bins.
So what does that mean in the context of annual visitation then?
So through the chair, so municipal solid waste generally refers to residential waste. So as opposed to commercial waste, it's the material, the waste that's generated by the public, so our residents.
So help me understand that figure then. So what's that? Is it in tonnes or is it in what trips, or I don't understand the context between municipal solid waste and visitation and the number. Help me understand.
Through you, Madam Chair, what it's saying is effectively those are the residential visits per annum at that site.
Right. So residential visits. Okay, cool. So people who live in homes as opposed to businesses visiting that site. Okay, cool.
And again, with those sites too, commercial customers technically are only allowed to attend Reedy Creek and Mollendine and Stapleton, where we have weighbridges and the per tonnage charge applies. And it's one of our ongoing issues that commercial customers coming into the residential, the smaller waste and recycling centres to avoid charging. So those percentages represent lost opportunity to a large degree in that that material that we could technically be recovering, reprocessing, recycling is being lost and taking up landfill space.
And in the case of Springbrook and Numinbah being 21,000 and 18,000, both of those sites don't have staff. How do we quantify that figure?
Through you, Madam Chair, we do have vehicle counters on site.
Vehicle counters. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, Chair, I just better to deal with the slide particulars while we're on the slide.
No, there's a lot of information in that, and we appreciate that we're throwing a lot of numbers in a short period of time here. So in terms of that background, that context that we've provided there, I just wanted to talk about the drivers for change. Why not just keep doing what we're doing right now? There's three themes really around the drivers for change. One is the financial sustainability and the growing financial impacts on ratepayers of our cost base. I'll talk a little bit more about the Queensland Waste Levy, but again, it is increasing every year by $10, and the rebate that the state government has provided or has historically provided is unwinding. So we are getting less remissions back from state government. Overall, the costs of waste management as a sector are increasing remarkably. If I can give you a couple of examples of that, because I know that every business says that our costs are going up, but we have some unique ones in waste at the moment. So, for example, our materials recovery facility, or the MRF, run by Visy, there was a time where council got a revenue stream for what was being directed to that facility. We shared that with Visy under contractual arrangements out of the material that was going to the from the yellow lidded bins. That changed 4 or 5 years ago for, again, this is sort of commodity markets, whereby that jumped to, we were paying a fee for that, and back at some stage it was around $50 a tonne, which was an additional cost item. That's substantially more than that right now. That's a commercial contract between council and Visy, so I can provide that in closed session, but I can tell you that we're paying a lot more than that volume now. So again, in cost increase. Our green organics processing, there is a view in some parts of the community, we do try and communicate this, that council actually generates revenue or gets a revenue stream from selling our green waste. That's incorrect. We pay processors to grind that material up and take it to places, for processing facilities, for that to be turned into soil conditioner and other products. Again, we've seen, due to effectively the processing industry and the supply and demand, with everybody trying to capture green organics, because again, green organics is something we desperately want to keep out of landfill. We want to move that stuff out to avoid paying waste levy on that material, and those green organics create an awful lot of other problems in landfill in terms of generation of landfill gas, which creates its own problem and leachate. So the industry in southeast Queensland and broadly across Australia is aggressively moving towards how can we capture more of our organics from our waste stream, and certainly there's a state government policy in Queensland to incentivise that, and an audit going on at the moment by Queensland Audit Office around the success of that process at the moment. But again, it wasn't too long ago we were paying $20 a tonne for the grinding and processing of that material and directing it to our processors. We're now talking above high 60s for that as well. So these big cost drivers underneath our business are changing pretty dramatically. The other thing I'd say around landfills, and one reason why we would like to get out of the landfill game, and you've obviously heard seen the presentations around ARC and our proposed directions there, is it's expensive to create landfill. We're always in this catch-up, or not catch-up, but this staying ahead of the curve, that we need to build landfill cells to accommodate the growing volumes of general waste that's being directed to those landfills. And these are heavily engineered structures, really expensive structures, and we're also competing with bulk landfill works, also bulk earthworks, with all the other traffic and other development infrastructure works going around on the coast and other places as well. So, for example, our construction cost per metres cubed around landfills, moved from 300 to over 600. We've experienced lately. So even these basic construction costs, because waste does have a fairly significant capital works portfolio. This year it's about $73 million, is increasing as well. So what I'm not trying to seek is a counselling session about the pressures that our business is under, but what I'm trying to do is paint a picture that some of these base costs that we are facing at the moment are accelerating, including the waste levy, which I'll touch on at the moment. Our OPEX costs of our waste and recycling centres is about $14.4 million. And the fleet and plant costs, importantly, represent about 45% of that. So moving these bins around between the waste and recycling centres and the and to landfill represents a fair chunk of the cost base of those. We've touched around those costs, the customer uses as well. So again, drivers for change, financial sustainability is a key one. The resource recovery and the need to increase that is another one. We lose about 53% of potential materials we can recover every year to landfill. We are under pressure. We are on track to be out of airfill space based on our current projections by the mid-2030s, and the cost of actually constructing those cells is going up. State diversion targets, we're well away from those at the moment, and we have pushed hard, and I'll talk about what's happened over the last couple of years to really increase those resource recovery rates. But for example, with our green organics, the rollout of our green organics bins saw a jump of about 5% increase in resource recovery, but that low-hanging fruit is not readily available anymore. We are talking about how do we capture and work with our community to change those behaviours, but also absolutely doing our part to increase the number of streams that we can capture. So non-e-waste scheme materials, mattresses is another one that we've spoken to you about before. So these are streams that we're actively providing and working on at the moment to provide some opportunities for our customers. The other element in terms of drive for change is about customer service. When we have a large number of WRCs, we dilute our spend on those WRCs. So our focus becomes heavily on maintenance and maintaining those as opposed to approving them. So there's an opportunity cost that comes with having that number of WRCs in the portfolio. The customer offering, as we spoke about before, is limited in some of those smaller ones. Just in terms of the levy, to make that a little clearer about what our trajectory is, because this is happening now. We're at that cross point. The levy at the moment is $105 a tonne. So every tonne of material that we capture from our customers and we send to our landfills is subject to a levy, which we pay to the state of $105 a tonne. Now that's going up $10 every year to 2028. And then we'll go to CPI after that. But what has taken the edge off that for our customers and why they've been shielded from that for a number of years is the state government, to protect residential customers, to protect families for the costs of the levy, has provided rebates back to councils. Now, that rebate is now unwinding. So the green line there is the value of that rebate. So at the moment, we're getting 95% of that back. That drops to 50% by 2028, and by 2031, that'll drop to 20%. So that gap, that delta is widening. So we've got a significant cost issue on our hands as part of that one, and we need to look at how a reason we're trying to divert materials away from the landfill is to shield ourselves to a degree from that. But this also feeds into our longer-term desire for ARC and looking for other solutions than a landfill solution. And that state policy is really trying to drive councils in that direction, recovery and moving away from landfills. The city has been working hard over the last 10 years to provide solutions. So what I don't want a perception of is that, we are now in a position where we are panicking and we need to take this sort of action right now. What I would suggest to you is that we have been active over the last 10 years in pulling all these other levers around how do we increase resource recovery rates, how do we address our cost bases. So there's a suite of summary, if you like, of the history over the last 10 years with some of those initiatives that Council has run. So those are really a mix of increasing recycling streams, so as I've mentioned before, up to 25 streams that we are diverting at the moment. Offering curbside services, so the yellow lidded bin, but also the dramatic expansion in our green organics bins, but also around comms. So we've had programs like Wipe Out Waste, schools programs, My Waste, My Responsibility. So that conversation with our community has been going on for a number of years. But we've also had some rationalisation and closures of facilities. So we had a WRC in days gone by in Suntown, a Mudgera Bar, Miami. So we have actually been reducing this quite large portfolio over a number of years. So we have a history of assertively trying to address this situation because we knew where the levy was going to drive. And again, we have another, if in the towards zero waste to landfill plan, you'll see another diagram along those lines around what can be possible in the next number of years. In terms of the proposed changes that we're focusing on for this item, there is a summary there, and if I can break that down, and obviously this is there's a fair degree of detail in the paper itself around this one. Customer charging is a theme, and a big theme of that is introduction of gate fees for residential customers at our WRCs. So our commercial customers pay this at the moment, but what we're proposing for our residential customers that we focus on, given the focus area of reducing our waste to landfill and our levy exposure, that we apply these fees only to materials, mixed waste, construction demolition and other wastes that are going to landfill. So recyclables, cardboards, those 25 streams would remain free. Customers can come as often as they want to drop off those materials, and the same with green organics as well. So those drop and go pads, residential customers can still attend those at no charge. The other element there is some customers that don't currently, and it's a small number of customers that we are continue to audit, around 900, perhaps less, that don't currently have a waste utility charge applied as part of their rate notices. Part of that can be a scenario whereby a customer where we cannot get services, so some in the more remote areas of some of our divisions, those customers certainly direct materials to the waste and recycling centres, and therefore we deal with those through our disposal chains and recycling change. But those customers at the moment don't pay anything for waste. We believe it would be a fair approach to charge a nominal fee for those customers, which reflect that they don't get a curbside service like other customers, but they actually do contribute to our waste costs as a city, and other ratepayers are currently covering that cost. This approach is not uncommon. There's other councils in Queensland that do just this, mainly in those areas that are out of the service range, so more rural areas. Facility changes. Looking at the utilisation and the efficiencies, we are proposing that we close Currumbin WRC, Numbamba WRC, and make some changes to Springbrook to revert that to back to its original intentions, which was a household WRC for those customers that don't receive a household waste service, for curbside service. Change the opening days of that from a 7-day-a-week operation to a 4-day-a-week, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and have an officer up there at that stage as well, so a staffed option up there. The other element there in terms of facility changes is around the green organics drop and go, and I'll unpack that in a slide coming up, as well as some of those other options. The voucher system, we can trial, we have an option to trial a voucher program, or we can go straight down the line of when a customer attends, they are subject to a fee. And I'll unpack these in a bit more detail in the coming slides, but in summary, the proposed changes are focused around how we charge customers for these services, with or without a voucher program sitting behind that, and changes to our facilities. I will note with those facility changes, an industry benchmark is that customers should be within a 20-minute drive of 80% of customers should be within a 20-minute drive of WRC. At the moment on the Gold Coast, that is 99% of our customers can reach a WRC in a 20-minute drive time. With the proposed facility changes, that would drop down to 98, but I think that is still a pretty high level of service. The broader changes that are outside what we're proposing here are around the ARC, the Advanced Resource Recovery Centre, and pursuing sort of approvals and working with Council on approvals for that initiative, with business cases and other activities underway. Bulk transfer stations, again, the big efficiency initiative, which is around and reflecting that we move all of that material to landfill at the moment from, for example, our JJ Richards curbside collection, Willie Bin collection, up to Stapleton. There's some efficiencies for that and other, and this is pure logistics, some of the recyclable materials where we bulk that up, compact it to a degree and run it in B doubles, for example, to reduce the number of travel trips up and down the M1. So, for example, if you're getting your bin picked up in Coolangatta, your general waste bin, your red lid bin, that truck driver drives to Stapleton to drop that off and then back again. So we are prisoners of geography to a degree with our landfill. And also the Pimper Premium Waste Recycling Centre. At the moment, we have the drop and go there. We're about to start construction on a recycled street and expansion of that drop and go there. And then the following stages will make that a premium centre, so akin to Reedy Creek, but we've got a blank page there so we can actually do best practice layout to maximise resource recovery and customer experience as part of that. Just in terms of unpacking the changes to charging, this is indicative. Obviously, we would, and this is based on similar charging. It's actually lower than some of the charges in South East Queensland. But just to give you a flavour of the discussion we could go down as part of Special Budget Committee of what those would be, is presented on the screen there. I mentioned that commingled recycled street green organics would remain free, but for the landfill waste, the mixed waste, the stuff that's going to our landfills, we would look to charge for those. We want to keep it as simple as possible because we have a large portfolio of WRCs and the costs of putting weighbridges and the actual physical limitations to be able to put weighbridges there. We can't do a pure tonnage rate. We would need to do a deeming program. So to keep that as simple as possible, we'd look at a vehicle and a ute for one fee level, and then a ute and a trailer as another one. We can unpack this further and make it more complicated, but we think from a pure customer experience and understandability, and to avoid all the conflicts that would occur if we're trying to split hairs at when customers attend our WRCs, simple would be far better. Commercial customers, as we try to do now, are redirected to those commercial, those WRCs that accept commercial waste. So Reedy Creek, Mollendina and Stapleton. So that would not change. And customer vehicles, residential customer vehicles, would sort of turn up with Pantec trucks and the like. We would redirect those to the larger centres as well, partly because unloading those takes a lot of time. We've got enough problems with queuing and wait times for our customers. That just increases the problem fairly remarkably when they are taking that long to unload. This is a busy slide, and again, it is taken from the paper itself. There are a number of ways we could charge at the gate, or recover those costs. So again, I've spoken about those cost base increasing. I will say that we do have a requirement. We are a commercialised business unit under the Local Government Act. As part of that commercialised business unit, or any operation, whether it's water or sewage or waste, those utility functions that are categorised as such, are required to apply a full cost pricing. So like any other business, if you charge less for your services than it costs you to provide them, you're on a road to a business that will fail. So therefore, under the Act and our requirements, we have to charge for the costs that it provides, that it takes to provide those services. So there's a couple of levers we can pull there. So one is we can smooth this across the entire ratepayer base. So we can increase the waste utility charge to make up that delta. That's not necessarily a user pays philosophy, because, as I mentioned before, for those customers that don't attend a WRC at all, they're effectively paying for something, a service that they're not getting. And those customers will probably have a view on that. Options 2 and onwards are really about a user pays philosophy. So if you attend a WRC, you pay for the use of disposing of your landfill waste at the WRC. We can do what other South East Queensland councils, as summarised in the earlier table, is that when a customer attends, they get charged for the first visit, second visit, and thereafter. The other option there is a voucher program, and we've split that out. We've done a fair bit of work in the background around how a voucher program could work in terms of digital options and technology to have a more consolidated and potentially a smoother customer experience. At the moment, it's looking like if we were to move ahead with this in the short term, we would look at a voucher program, a physical voucher program, which could be, for example, a QR code on the back of a rates notice. So a customer would attend WRC with a rates notice, get that scanned in, and they'd get their, to whatever we go with free visits as part of that one. I will note that if we do go to a voucher program, that does offset the revenue, so that needs to be balanced out somewhere. So the revenue that would not be captured via a voucher program or would be effectively taken away by a voucher program would need to be transferred across the waste utility charge, because that funding needs to come from somewhere to be able to provide those services.
Can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Councillor Tozer.
So my question is just the voucher program, there must be like a cost nominally proportional to the amount of vouchers actually used. Have we costed out the actual voucher program administration?
Yes, Councillor, there is a significant administrative cost associated with that, and also we have consulted with our colleagues in other jurisdictions, and their advice has been, from officer level, has been pretty firm in terms of if we can avoid going this path, that would be that would have some very positive outcomes. Christy has looked at this in detail, so I wonder if I could get a quick summary from Christy about the costs associated with the voucher program and some of the implications of a voucher program, if I could.
Through you, Madam Chair, some of the things that are easily quantifiable is the printing. So let's go with a paper voucher system. The printing and the distribution costs that are associated with that. So that's what we have forecasted. What the advice was from our neighbours that they couldn't quantify is what they call hidden costs. So that's the overflow on your customer contact time, it's your increase in complaints administration processes, and it's the additional subcontract costs for additional processing and security members on site for those sorts of programs. So we have a nominal charge outlined in the cost column, which is for the software or the printing of a program and the general administration of that. What we can't account for are the hidden costs of those kinds of programs.
So in the table in front of us under option 3, it says WRC user pays plus paper vouchers, and it's got a cost of in the vicinity of $200,000. Is that the cost? Is that cost kind of encompasses all of the voucher program administration estimate costs?
It covers the printing and distribution with an FTE to address the nominal management of that program.
Yeah, and the system in Brisbane, according to the table on page 54, says that Brisbane has a system where everyone pays $17 to go to the tip, but they get 10 100 kilo vouchers.
So they have a 10 voucher program. Each voucher has a weight base to it. So if you bring in a large load, you might be using 4 vouchers for that visit, for example.
So if you drop off a couch and it's 100 kilos, then that's 1 voucher. But if you drop off a fridge and it's 200 kilos, then...
Or, for example, if you're taking in a significant amount of renovation waste, so construction and demolition, that then weighs more, so you'll use more vouchers. They have an 85% utilisation rate, so 85% of their potential revenue is covered by vouchers from the customer.
Okay.
Councillor, I could note to that one as well. We've spoken at length to Brisbane on this one. They have about 1.3 million visitors to the WRCs a year. 1.1 of those visits are covered by vouchers. Their vouchers are transferable. You can buy them on eBay or Gumtree.
Oh, there's like a secondary market.
There is a secondary market. Yeah, it is. And skip companies actually advertise, we'll give you $50 for your book if you didn't use them. So it's quite a different approach up there.
Wow. Do you have any information about how many people actually pay the gate fee in Brisbane?
So 1.3 million visitors, that includes residential customers and commercial customers, and 1.1 of those have free entry. So the delta of that actually pay that gate fee itself.
So they have a $17 charge on there. And so do you pay it even when you got a voucher, or you don't pay it?
No, you don't pay. So only those, whatever the balance is, 200,000 visitors, they will pay that 17. And as a result of that...
so their revenues are in the vicinity of $2 million?
Yes, and again, that's captured, the revenue to make up for that is captured in their waste utility charge. Yeah, so it's effectively spread over their entire ratepayer base.
Okay. That's all my questions about this slide, sorry.
Councillor Patterson, did you have a question about vouchers? Or this slide?
Yeah, I did, and what was just said. So I'm just not quite sure whether we do this now or you want us to do questions later.
And is it to do with the vouchers?
Yeah.
Yep, I'll take it now.
So first, to be clear, you're not recommending we implement a voucher system?
We believe it would be a more efficient and fairer process if there were no vouchers.
Yep.
And customers paid as they used from the first visit.
And with the weigh bridges that you referred to, or the weighing in Brisbane, so does that assume that they've got weigh bridges at every facility?
Through the chair, yes, it does, Councillor. They have 4 facilities. They're large facilities, very purpose-designed ones, and they have a weigh bridge on the way in and on the way out, so they can net out that charge.
And my understanding is that when you spoke and you got feedback from other councils on what works and what doesn't, Brisbane was pretty adamant that whatever you do, don't put a voucher system in because it's just creating a lot of pain and angst and operational admin and another currency. Is that a fair assumption?
Through the chair, I think we could say that they pointed out a range of difficulties that voucher program and behaviours that creates, and the impact that has on how they actually pay to run the WRCs.
And did they also, through you, Chair, make mention of that weighing system and whether that was valuable to be able to identify?
Look, it does. That sorry, through the chair, we did speak about that. Weigh bridges are great. If you, they're expensive to install, but they're good because they take any deeming is challenging because you might have a large trailer or a small trailer, and a customer attending may want to argue the point about how they should be categorised. And again, not a good customer experience. Certainly not a good experience for our staff at those sites with occupational abuse and sometimes violence. Anything that measures something takes the argument out. So if it's for our commercial customers that attend our weighbridge sites, you pay by the tonne. No arguments. Everyone understands the rules.
Got a lot more, but that's it for now. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I can just add, it wasn't just Brisbane that we spoke to, Councillor. There was not a single council we spoke to who had a positive administration recommendation around vouchers. Some of them face similar challenges to some of their sites that we do, where they physically don't have the space to implement a weighbridge. Take Helensvale, for example. You pop a weighbridge in there and it actually drives traffic out onto the road system, worse than any sort of peak period traffic we see at the moment. Those councils use deem systems as well, and they still didn't have a different experience in the administration.
There's more slides after this, Chris, is there?
There are. I can get my skates on if you like, Councillor.
Are you happy to continue with the presentation and we'll save questions? Thanks.
Okay, look, I'll just point out that bottom one there, which is a different approach than traditional vouchers, a little bit different for other councils. We are at the moment, and we'll be bringing a paper to the March WWE committee around our bulky curbside and how we can actually expand the eligibility to that. A feature of that, sort of spoiler alert, is looking at Smarty grants approach for consideration, whereby if we physically can't get a blue bag in to service your facility, so if you're property. So, for example, if you're in a community title scheme, the high-rise or whatever, it's just impractical to be able to provide that, given the limitations, physical limitations. We are proposing that those customers, given that they don't have any opportunity for a bulky curbside program, is that we can bring in and support local businesses by allowing those body corporates and those customers to self-serve. So 2 people in a truck or a skip, and then we provide a remission to contribute towards that, in recognition that if you live in an eligible house that gets a bulky curbside blue bag, you're getting a benefit and those other customers aren't. So that may well be an offset to vouchers, or almost an alternative voucher scheme, in that what it's doing is saying we would like to put something in place to avoid you to having travel to a WRC, as opposed to you driving there anyway and then we exchange vouchers. So that's something we would like to, we think that could work and find that middle ground.
Why is the cost of that so low? Less than a quarter of a million?
We did some calculations around the likely uptake of that, and that's really based on what the percentage of population of residential properties that are currently eligible for a blue bag actually take up that offer. And it's increasing, it's getting more and more popular, but it's still fairly low. So maybe around 10% of customers that can get a blue bag do get a blue bag. So I think we've doubled that to about 18% of people that would take up that Smarty Grants option. So that's the basis of that.
3 years.
Look, just those customer journeys, just representing some of the concepts I've spoken to before. So if you are a typical customer who visits once, you can attend a WRC and you either have a voucher or a charge for mixed waste or general waste. So waste is going to landfill. You're not charged for recycling or green wastes. Or if you're eligible for a flexi skip, bulky curbside service, then you can avail yourself of that at no charge. If we go down a voucher, so not the Smarty Grants, but the normal voucher, you'd have 2 visits, say, and then you're charged for material going to landfill. But again, you're free every time for the other materials that are recoverable.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I just had a
Sorry,
question.
Councillor Castro.
How many flexi skips are permissible per year?
Pardon?
Flexi skips, how many can a household have per year? It's 1 per year.
Yes, eligible properties are allowed 1 per calendar year.
Okay. This is going to sound like a strange question, but I'll deal with it later. Can you put green waste in flexi skips?
Absolutely. Very common. People do that. They do their big clean out. It's the size of a trailer. Thank you. And finally, look, we've touched on this waste management access charge. So these are the customers that are using the WRCs, so they're generating waste and recyclables. They don't get a curbside service, therefore they're not being charged a waste and utility charge. So the cost of providing those customers with waste services being borne by the wider ratepayer base. What we're proposing is a waste management access charge, which is not at the level of the waste utility charge that customers apply, but a nominal rate to cover those costs. So it's about a user pay and minimal cross-subsidisation. For those customers, they would pay that. So let's take an example of someone in Springbrook who doesn't get a curbside service, charge that nominal charge on their rates notice. They can go to the the WRC, Springbrook WRC, with a token or another indicator, and they don't pay for that, so that we're not double dipping for those customers. And there's not that many of them, so we need to keep things as simple as we can for those customers. In terms of those proposed site changes, I've touched on these a little bit. The Merrimack Green organics drop and go was something that will generate some concern amongst our customers. At the moment, we operate that green organics pad at Merrimack. on land that has previously been allocated for the expansion of the Merrimack sewage treatment plant. That expansion is now underway, and as a result of that, we need to get off that site with that green organics pad. So we took the opportunity while nothing was happening there to provide a higher level of customer service to set up that pad, a pretty basic pad up there. But now that that sewage treatment plant expansion is moving on to that one, that pad can't stay where it is. Given we didn't want to simply come back to council and face those customers and say, sorry, you had it good for a while as a temporary measure, we did look at how we could go ahead with actually replacing that. So the planning engineers looked at a range of different options. Those options are really expensive. There's some really there's some complications on that site. Related to the hydraulic offsets that we need to make. So if you can picture that site to the east of that site where the koala fodder, Crumman Sanctuary grows koala food trees there, there's a drop-off which is on that floodplain. If we start doing earthworks there, we have to balance out that hydraulic offsets so we're not increasing flood risks of that catchment. And the other complications around there, around the fodder plantation itself, and a range of other challenges that the team looked at and did some pretty detailed breakdown on that one. We think the most viable one, without looking at price, is in the order of about $4.5 million. That's an extraordinary amount of money for a green organics pad. I think we set up the existing one there for, maybe 400, 500? 400. I should be reading my own slides. Thank you, Councillor. Again, given that price and those complications and the opportunity cost associated with that in terms of what could we do with that money in that waste network, it is our recommendation that we don't replace that pad once the sewage treatment plant expands onto that land.
Absolutely. Thanks, Councillor Young.
Through you. I presume that we can't just slide that cost over to the sewage treatment plant operations because they're taking that land from us for this. I mean, I know it's just cost shifting, but I presume that we were granted that space on a temporary basis and now they want it back.
I like yours, through the chair. I like your approach, Council. In essence, it's owned by the commercialised business unit of the water and sewage business. So, to put it crudely, I think we've been really squatting on that land ever since, and I know they wouldn't entertain that scenario as much as I'd like that they would. The two closures, I'll quickly touch on these ones. Currumbin, based on the pure numbers and the utilisation and the costs of that one for an efficient network, on paper it does suggest that it would be appropriate to close that.
Councillor O'Neill.
Just through you, Chair, to Chris. Chris, how many days a week or how many hours a week is it operating at the moment?
My understanding is 4 days per week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or are we doing Thursday as well now?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's Friday to Monday.
Friday to Monday, yeah.
Okay. Just wondering if there's an opportunity to even reduce that further rather than take it away completely. Have you done any figures on that at all?
Some of those base costs, apart from labour, would be fairly the same. It's a fairly remote site with fairly low utilisation. And Councillor, I appreciate how some members of the community are going to feel about that, because I have spoken to that community when we expanded the waste collection area up in the valley, and a number of those customers were really unhappy that we're providing a waste service up in the valley, and did signal, where this could end. So this won't necessarily be popular with a number of those customers, and I appreciate that.
Councillor Tozer and then Councillor Patson.
For Nummaba, does the $51,000 per annum include gate damage or illegal dumping?
Through you, Madam Chair, for the 23-24 operating year, which is what these figures have come from, it did. In this current financial year, Numbamba has cost just over $50,000 in illegal dumping alone.
Already in this?
Yes.
Right. So could you describe what illegal dumping looks like in this space? What does that mean? Sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair, Numbamba sees a lot of commercial dumping. We do see residential, so your children's play toys, those sorts of things that shouldn't be going to that site because it's not suitable for bulky waste.
Yes.
But a lot of the pieces that we see there are commercial loads, and the reason why we know they're commercial loads is because they have business stickers on them. When we reach out through the enforcement process to those businesses, often they've paid a private contractor, so they've gone onto your Airtasker or two guys in a truck. They've paid someone to remove the waste from their site, and therefore they don't feel they're responsible for the fact that it has been dumped to avoid gate fees.
Through you, Madam Chair, and just to add to that, we also get quite a lot of illegal dumping of asbestos up there, Councillor Tozer.
So asbestos gets dumped at Numbamba?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And through the Chair, I could also note we believe a portion of that waste is coming across the border.
Just coming up from New South Wales and...
Yeah, so avoiding New South Wales gate charges.
It's quicker to New South Wales than it is to Reedy Creek. I think 30 minutes to Reedy Creek's a bit tight. I challenge you on that one. I'm not sure which of you drove that in 30 minutes from Reedy Creek to Numbamba. I'm like, goodness gracious.
Through you, Madam Chair, that was my weekend.
Wow.
And it took me 40 minutes to go to Reedy Creek.
On the weekend. All right.
Councillor Patterson.
I just realised I got general questions.
Okay.
So
yep, we'll hold on
after the presentation, if I may.
Thank you. I'll let you be first up.
Oh.
Councillor Young, was yours about the previous slide?
Yeah, that previous slide, if you don't mind. Thank you.
You can bring it back up.
I wonder if costing's been done on looking at a reduced number of days per week, let's say 2 days for each of these operations?
Through the Chair, with the Numbamba one, it's a really exposed site, and even in terms of open, it's pretty much open 24/7 at the moment. We could secure that by putting up a heap of fencing, but it would still be exposed to the night droppers. We can't even put lighting in there because of the environmental constraints around that. We're in a natural area, and I understand that we've got some concerns around sort of native wildlife impacts and those sorts of things. So it's a really popular place to drop stuff in the middle of the night.
Through you, Madam Chair, we have looked at access control measures as well at those two sites, and they're pretty expensive to actually introduce either staffing or some kind of enhanced access control, about $100,000.
Well, how do we restrict at Currumbin to 4 days a week now? What happens Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Are there gates? Is it open?
It's a fully secured site, so big gates like that. We do get break-ins there every now and then, stealing batteries depending on the price of lead and those sorts of things.
So Currumbin's able to be closed, so why don't we just close it more days? Have we done costing on just keeping it open 2 days a week or 3?
Through you, Madam Chair, the significant cost for most of those centres is in transport. So for Currumbin in particular, the transport fees for that side are over $100,000. Regardless of if you reduce your days of service, your transport requirements don't change, especially when it comes to solid waste from households. There are actually risks, environmental risks to leaving that for the whole 4 days and only doing one transport movement.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Neill.
Through the Chair to Chris. So if Currumbin was to close, there's probably around about, from my estimation, around about 70-odd households that do rely on that centre for their solid waste. And I think from those slides you were looking at a reduced utility price. How reduced? Because then they're going to have to, when you consider that they're going to have extra petrol costs to get to Reedy Creek, it's just not sitting well with me at the moment.
Councillor Young.
Thank you. If you don't mind, another question. I know in Guanaba, a lot of people don't have a curbside collection service, so we've got some kind of waste facility in a park, and people have got keys to access that. They just take the waste there themselves. It's not great, but they seem to cope with it. I wonder if we've looked at that as an option, at least at Currumbin.
Through the chair, look, we have had a look at those bin corrals. They suffer some of the similar problems that Numbaba, not necessarily to the degree that Numbaba does in terms of dumping costs, where people do see an opportunity to sort of use that as a tip as well. They're fairly inefficient in terms of the clean-up, the city cleaning and city maintenance go in there. So we did consider that, but we didn't sort of unpack that to a huge level of detail that I'm aware of, based on the experience with bin corrals like the one you're referring to. Just quickly wrapping up with Springbrook, the philosophy of Springbrook is really around returning that facility to the purpose it was originally built for, and that was to service those customers for household waste that didn't get a bin service. The changes that have occurred over a number of years is I guess the expansion of uses for that to be accepting bulky waste, so not just household waste. And the other change there is the bin collection services extending up into the valley and up into Springbrook as well. So again, looking at the data for that one, we are proposing in returning that to the original intent and limiting the days that it is opened. So that would be for pure household waste. So for those people who want to come down who haven't got a wheelie bin, would be able to drop their material in that facility.
What's been the presentation rate for the bins in Springbrook since we gave them curbside bins?
Because we have that data at hand.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's over 50%.
So now that, is it 80%, some reasonable percentage of people, all but 101 residents have got bins, only 50% of them are around 50% of them are putting them out on the street.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's on average in terms of it's not necessarily the households that are presenting, it's the presentation rate of the bin. So the household might present once a month instead of once a fortnight, and then collectively the presentation rate is 50%. What that does indicate to us is that while residents are using their bins in the area, they're also either producing a reduced amount of household waste, which means they don't need to put their bin on the curbside, or they're not double dipping, but they're using both services.
Yeah, and what's the average presentation rate across the city?
Across the city, it sits at about 64%.
Okay. So just so I've got that stat clear, of the general waste bin across the city, they only get presented 64% of the time. They only got collected or put out on the street 64% of the time.
Through you, Madam Chair, when we're looking at curbside rates, that is also impacted by what we would say is short-term lease accommodations across the city.
Okay.
And look, just as a summary of what we're proposing is that in terms of those changes, what stays the same are those facilities and their operations as above. The proposed changes in summary are the introduction of a waste management access charge for those remote customers, introduction of new recycling streams. So again, in parallel with asking our customers to change, we need to accelerate the additional lines. We're talking sort of additional e-waste streams as well as mattress and other elements. Introduction of residential access charges at the WRCs, closing Currumbin, Numbaba, and not re-establishing a new Mary Mac Green Organics drop and go, and then those changes we've just touched on around Springbrook. In terms of...
Councillor Young.
I don't know if this is the right time, but just related to that slide, I want to ask a question about these charges for residential access to WRCs. So, for example, if I'm taking old clothes or something like that to the WRC at Helensvale to put them in the bins there for charity organisations, I'll be charged?
Through the chair, no. It's just about the materials that will go to landfill. So they will be captured, sent to Endeavour and processed.
Yeah, but I've got some rubbish in the boot as well. So I've got some rubbish and I've got some clothes.
I understand, Councillor. We face this scenario, if you like, when we opened up the Pimpamar Green Waste Drop and Go, in that people would attend that site and they'd have, say, 90% green organics, and they'd have a few things they wanted to throw in the tip.
Yeah.
How we handled that at that time, as we transitioned and helped people in terms of splitting and mixing and working out the timing of those attendants, is we put like some wheelie bins, so that waste. That landfill waste, if you like, would go to the wheelie bin, and that actually put a physical sort of dimension around. People wouldn't turn up with a 50-50 and try and shove that in the bin or push it to one side. This will be a rub, and this is the challenge with the layout of our sites, in that if you look at, for example, at Reedy Creek, the layout of that site, because it's been designed and set out in more modern times, is you have a customer flow where the customer drives past Recycled Street, they can offload all those materials, and then they move across into the landfill waste with whatever's left. So there would be some requirements, and I know this won't be easy for some customers to really think about how they interact and travel. So if you're doing a green waste load, a large load, then that would be the approach. You wouldn't be charged for that. But if you are turning up with a 50-50, we would charge for that for the full rate. I know that doesn't sit well and it will get bumpy, and we'll need to do a lot of work with our staff to be able to not come across as dogmatic or difficult, particularly in that transition phase. But those elements aren't perfect.
Wow.
Through you, Madam Chair, and just to add to what Chris has already said, I guess any change will be accompanied by quite a significant education and communications plan, and we are looking at potentially offering additional staff up front over those few months leading into changes, and when the changes are actually implemented, we're looking at a concierge service on site who will actually guide customers in providing education on sorting their load, what they can bring, what's free of charge, and obviously having those small bins in place to accommodate small loads of waste.
Okay. So can I just raise another scenario? And this is particular to me. I don't know how many other people this counts for, but I pay the waste recovery for curbside pickup, and I never use it because it's too far from my house. I'm not going to trundle the bins 400 metres to the front gate, and I don't keep them up there because they're going to get tipped over. So I take waste maybe every month or 2 months to Helensvale, and it's predominantly recycling. So I've separated the waste and it's all recycling, and I have a small amount of material to go to landfill. So presumably I'll be charged for that. So it's kind of like a disincentive now for me to separate my waste. Can you see that?
Look, I can. And there are a lot of scenarios where around that periphery, depending on different customers' behaviour.
Yeah.
But I guess we're trying to come up with a model that captures the 80% of behaviours. It will mean that customers, in some cases, will need to hold off and build up waste rather than sort of taking that mixed load. That's one of the downsides of not charging for the recycling. Well, we might talk about it.
Councillor Tozer.
Where it says 9 waste recycling centres, there's only 8 listed. Are we missing one?
Have we got the 2 Stradbroke ones there?
So just got 9 waste recycling centres operating in the Jacobsville, Pimpa, Helensvale, Wollondona, Merrimack, Reedy Creek. What am I missing?
Through the chair, I think there's 2. I know there's 2 at Stradbroke, but we've just represented them as Stradbroke Island. So
Stradbroke Island has 2.
So Kurrajee and
2 centres.
And Tipplers.
Yep. Okay.
They're very small ones over there, and very costly to run. Final slide. In terms of a proposed timeline for proceeding with this, there are some interdependencies there depending on how council wants to approach this. We would look at making those the closures and changes at the middle of the year, so end of financial year, that change piece, and the charges would apply potentially from October, November. What's happening in parallel with this is we have 20-year-old Weybridge software which tracks all our customer interactions. We're in the middle of a software changeover modernisation right now, and to ensure that this goes smoothly and it captures these customers and we can process them, minimise disruption. information and capture all the data. We wouldn't want to proceed with a charging regime until that was in place and commissioned, and we just hand on heart know that's going to work. If council chooses to go with a voucher program, for example, it goes on rates notices, we would look at triggering that once people had the vouchers sort of in their hands. So that would be in a rates notice run, for example, which might be February or something like that next year. But again, an indicative timeline for the changes that that we are proposing. And that's the slides, Councillor.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So I had Councillor Patterson and Councillor Martin that held off their questions during the slides, so I will take those first and then I'll open to the rest of the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll start with a broad strategy question. So last year, Council signed off on its risk profiling for the city and identified the risk profiling categories, which is to inform every recommendation that comes to Council. I didn't note anything about that in the report. Can you just confirm what categories and risk profiles relate to this?
I think the primary one would be the financial, the sustainability related risks there.
Okay, so financial. And do you remember the risk profiling for that one?
No, I don't, Councillor, but I can take that on
And the customer service one, do you remember the risk profiling for that?
Not at hand, Councillor.
Okay, so my understanding is the customer service one was conservative, which meant we will protect customer service at all costs, and that the financial one was balanced, so it's not as vital. In future, it would be great, and I don't know when that transition's coming, but it was explained to us that when Council made that resolution and that direction through to departments, that reports would come with that lens of what we've determined. Okay, so that's just first question, and thanks. Second question, we had a workshop a little while ago, which my understanding was for councillors to provide feedback which would inform how this was presented to us and, you know, what we'd take and how this would come back to us. There was something that was a pretty big standout that I understood that all councillors agreed was something we wanted. What were your kind of key considerations of the feedback from councillors from that you put in that you thought were important?
A couple of key concerns that our councillors expressed was around customer service levels. Again, we've spoken to a degree on that through the presentation using benchmarks around travel times to WRCs against that 80% within 20 minutes. The other element there was around fairness. How would this sort of affect in terms of charging? So is it a fair way or not? That certainly is something contemplated, and again, you know, we've taken the view that a user pays is generally, by definition, fairer. I think the other element too that I certainly took away from the councillor sessions was around concerns about dumping and the impacts of dumping and cleaning up the city. So we can unpack that a little bit more if council would like to talk about that. And the other one is just about customer service levels. So not necessarily just travel time, there's a lot more to it than that. It's really about that customer experience when they arrive at those facilities. Are these sort of modern, coherent customer experiences where they can dispose of these items? Do they have other alternatives to attending this? So certainly that was another key theme that customers spoke about, that the councillors spoke about. Keep the customer front of mind, keep the community front of mind.
Okay, thank you. Well, my memory was, because they were all quite general things that were already brought up from officers. My memory, and it was something that was raised by Councillor O'Neill, and my understanding was in that workshop we did get unanimous agreement from councillors that yes, that's something we would like to see, is that we wanted community consultation on this before it came back. And I left that workshop, I don't know whether anyone else did, believing that that's what was going to occur. So I was a bit surprised to see this report or recommendation in the first place without those actions taken. Do you remember that element of the workshop?
Through you, Madam Chair, that was one of a few workshops. The consideration of consultation and or outreach and communication was raised by both yourself and Councillor O'Neill. That was not raised in other workshops. When we look into the community consultation as referenced in this slide pack, significant consultation was undertaken in 2024. And while we haven't provided a communication and outreach plan with this, that is because we would not predetermine Council's decision. However, as you can see on the proposed timeline, significant consultation and community outreach is significant communication and community outreach is planned before any change occurs.
The other question I have, and through you, Chair, you will remember that I've been asking probably every 3 to 6 months since I was first elected in 2020 about bulky curbside for those who don't currently receive it. I'm just wondering the timing when this report refers to bulky curbside, refers to that we need to do it, but we haven't got resolution on that. But despite councillors asking for that for so many years, and now it's coming next month, so it's coming a month after we're meant to be making a decision on this. What is the reason why we could not have got that as timings around? So if you're asking us to make an assumption based on those service levels on curbside, why wouldn't that come first?
Through the Chair, really, we like to run these in parallel, and ideally we would have done them at the same time because we are talking largely about bulky items, things that you can't put in the bin. We have scheduled, and a paper will be presented next one, but we've flagged in here the direction of that paper, which is around we have physical reasons why we can't extend bulky curbside to a large number of our customers, but we recognise we want to address that disparity. Now, I think looking at a voucher program, a Smarty Grant style application of a remission to provide a curbside service may well be considered as a pseudo voucher program as well. So if Council, through the resolutions that are placed up there around looking at certain things in Special Budget Committee, we can bring those things together in that conversation, but having open and detailed papers coming in a public forum so that customers can understand some of the drivers that we're facing, that we are ultimately trying to achieve greater resource recovery, financial sustainability, without taking our eyes off the customer service levels that we are committed to providing. So we will bring that paper. I think the conversations will be entwined, and even if we don't go down the path of that Smarty Grants for this item, I still think we need to be addressing that for the bulky curbside service regardless. So we may well have both of those under one scenario.
Thanks. Councillor Martin, then Councillor Taylor, then Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Doran.
Thanks, Chair. Just have a few financial questions. On when you talked about the graph between the levy and the rebate and the delta, that's the gap, do you have real dollar figures as to that divergence around how much that would cost, that gap?
So I think we've covered that in the paper, just to see how that's been building, or that wave that is expanding. I wonder if I can throw to our guys to give you a picture of, say, in 2028 based on those projections.
If you could find that, but I've just follow-on questions if you could direct me to that number when you find it. And with the waste utility charge, if it was spread across the whole ratepayer base, that gap, what would be that charge per ratepayer if we were not introducing access?
Our estimate and our modelling suggests that if we had to actually take the costs of operating and heading towards a full cost pricing model, which we're obliged to do, in 25-26 it would be in the order of $55 on top of the current waste utility charge. The year after potentially 85, and then hitting about 100 the year after that.
And thank you.
Can I ask a question just about that? So just about that. So that change corresponds with these rising costs, or does it correspond with the relaxing of the subsidies provided by the state?
It's a combination of the rising costs and the subsidy. So both of those, and again, heading towards a full cost pricing model for those WRC's operations.
Yeah, sorry, that just about that. Thank you, Chair. And so just looking at the efficiency of the different WRCs, I think we've got sort of the 400,000 visits of the million. Some of those trip fees are sort of $6, $7. So I just wonder what would be the efficiency saving if we were able to get those 400,000 visits down to, say, a Reedy Creek, Mollendina, sort of $3.50 per trip. What sort of savings, efficiencies could we find with that?
I can't be specific to the dollar, but in terms of the trajectory that we would lay on the different layers of cost savings there, we do think, based on experience in other jurisdictions, when you do put a charge at the gate, people do think twice about, do I really need to go to the WRC with this load? We do find a lot of really small loads come to the WRC. Without being facetious, it is a bit of an activity for people. That behaviour would change. So in terms of, the activity at those sites would be another element of that.
Sorry, Chair, last question on that. So understand that, but could we get essentially the other WRCs to the similar cost per trip as Reedy Creek and Mollendina at that lower level?
Look, I don't think so. I think they can only be achieved in big sites with full service. And certainly the resource recovery rates, no, because we just don't have the space for the full portfolio of the recoverables we want in those. There's just that pure economy of scale, I'd suggest, in those facilities and the layout of those facilities as well. So if you look at them in different tranches, you've got what we pitch as a premium centre, if you like, and our Pimpamar, once we run through the various stages of construction of that, will be effectively the benchmark. I think we will get some good running costs out of that, great recovery rates and a really good customer experience. The other two, that sort of spine of the three, so Mollendina, we've got some limitations on that site just because of the nature of what's there now, and Reedy Creek. Then you get that second tranche of facilities, and I'd bundle up Helensvale, Merrimack, and to a degree Jacobs Well as that next round, and you'll get comparable efficiencies and recovery rates out of those, given the nature of those sites and the offerings in those sites. And then you've got, perhaps you could call them the rural sites. So these are the Stradbroke Islands sites as well as the Springbrook. So my view is you won't get those three tranches ever up to that top level just because of the nature of the operations and the physical layout of those ones. Is that? Yeah, okay, thank you.
I had Councillor Taylor next.
Thank you, and through the Chair, I've got an interest in CTS or body corporates, and obviously we are growing and it's going to continue to get uplift, and we don't have the ability to have the blue bag or bulk curbside. How do we, by introducing a fee, there'll be a lot of people that would have to go to a waste facility to dispose of their waste because they don't have that facility. And I know we've spoken about vouchers, but how would there be a way that we could provide them the same sort of services without them having to spend additional funds by going to a facility and dispose of it? And there is a second part of the question too, is a lot of these buildings don't have the ability to separate their waste. And how do we manage that? So again, if I'm in a high-rise and I want to encourage separation, I would have to, in most cases, go to a facility and dispose of it accordingly. How are we considering those residents moving forward? One, in relation to additional costs to them because they still have to go and dispose of their waste, and two, there's segregation of waste in high-rises.
through the chair. Can I just, we might split that one up. The first thing is just about the services we provide, and in your division, Council, you're aware of some of the challenges with the old buildings and the physical space to literally put a bin. And the frustrating part is that those legacy issues that we carry is that we are in a situation where we can't have two bins, we can just have one, and we lose so much of that material as part of that, and that's sort of a wicked problem that we really struggle with. How can we have permutations around, can we put a couple of smaller bins, and how we manage that? That is going to be an ongoing challenge with those sites. In answer to, or related to the second part, is how do we provide those customers with a bulky curbside service as an option? So you are correct in that the only option that those customers currently have at the moment is to take that stuff to a WRC and therefore be subject to, if it's not recyclable, be subject to a gate fee as part of that one. And they can't get the blue bag service at the moment because the physical constraints and the eligibility of that. 2 points on that one. One is in terms of the volume of the material that comes out of those smaller residences tends to be a little bit lower than what comes out of some of the quarter-acre blocks around town. That's not an excuse, but the nature of those is that they probably use that service a little bit less. My concern is around the dumping elements of those ones as well. But this disparate situation we've got at the moment is that we don't have a curbside service for them, and even when we back in the days when we had everyone throw your stuff out on the footpath, a lot of those denser areas we just couldn't provide that service anyway because it was just for safety issues. That being said, we've got to provide a solution. We've got to provide some equity there. It will come at a cost. I think probably the most practical and quickest way that we could do this, that also provides opportunities for local businesses rather than competing against them, is to provide an offset, so contribution. I don't hide from the fact that will sort of be co-funded, if you like, so that resident or that body corporate will need to put some money up front for that one, and the city under this model could provide a remission to go part of the way there to share that cost. But I'm not sure from a pure budget point of view, because I think this would be a community service obligation, so we'd have some wider budget deliberation considerations whether we'd go all the way in providing that service. Because again, we have that, how big and how small the volume of material that building is throwing out. One of the beauties of the blue bags is that it solved that huge dilemma, mainly around when people were putting stuff out on the curb in years gone by, the conflict that just reigned during that period, because someone would put out 3 trees, like just massive, and then expect it to be picked up. And then we'd have the complaints and just all that conflict around those sorts of things. The blue bag is 3 cubic metres. It's the size of a decent-sized trailer. Keep it within those. There are some people that really push that. As you're driving around, you'll see some sites. But that deals with that one. We just can't do that in a lot of these properties. We are, as part of the bulky curbside expansion, absolutely keen to expand that into some of those horizontal developments where we can physically put it and where we can physically get a crane truck in there, and we get permission and some coverage around if those guys damage when they're putting their feet out. So our contractor doesn't sort of price in sort of risk and lawsuits into the pricing that provides the city. So a long-winded answer, but that's part of that bulky curbside model that we're proposing.
I appreciate that. We've just had a big conversation about equity and what ratepayers pay. And the reality is there's residents that don't have access to this particular service, and my concern is they're going to have to pay additional funding. I totally appreciate the fact as a city we need to consider this, but I'm just really interested in how we consider CTS residents when they will or may have to pay additional costs when they previously didn't. So they may go to the tip right now and offload potential goods that they don't want because they don't have the particular facility. And also reductions of services, how that would look where there's large CTSs and we're talking about segregation of, and that's our challenge as a city, is managing our recycling. It's a challenge. We appreciate that, but how do we encourage the separation? And that's one of the biggest challenges we've got. So still interested in what that looks like for our residents. But then my biggest concern is, and you did touch on, is illegal dumping. And what have you considered in that space, what that could look like, or what the cost to the city would be with illegal dumping?
So through you, Madam Chair, just before we get to illegal dumping, I'd like to add on to your original questions, Councillor Taylor, because we've worked quite a lot in your area, especially around the high-rise buildings. Chris was right in saying that it's a challenging area, which you've acknowledged. There's a couple of different service options that we've been trialling with high-rises specifically in your division lately, and I'll speak to the food organics later because that's about 33% of a high-rise bin. But we're also in the process of, we've just wound up a glass crushing trial, which is a machine which then actually pays the dividend of the COEX refund or the containers for change refund back to the body corporate. So we are trialling different services to work directly with those body corporates to help them understand where they can move materials out of the general waste bin, which then obviously allows the customer to either utilise that bin more functionally, or possibly the body corporate gets a reduction in service frequency and they might save some money there. When it comes to the bulky curbside service, sitting on the body corporate panels as you do, I'm sure you're aware that a lot of those body corporates already have to organise their own skip bins. They do the internal communication with their customers through Facebook and their lifts. What we're looking is to subsidise that cost for them. So they're already paying through their body corporate fees for part of that service. We're looking to lighten the burden there.
I've got Councillor O'Neill and Councillor Doran, but did you have it? Sorry.
Yeah, illegal dumping. I was just interested in the
Can we touch on illegal dumping, Councillor, to do that one? Look, this is something that we are really aware of and really concerned and have spent a bit of time thinking about how we could address that and what the likely impacts and the research that's available on what happens at these change points. I might, if I could, hand over to Christy on this one. She's been doing the research, or Christy or Murray. But is one we prepared earlier.
Sure, thanks, Chris, and through you, Madam Chair. So we have increased the city budget to accommodate potential temporary spikes in illegal dumping should any of these changes be endorsed. We've looked at the data actually, and the Department of Environment Science and Innovation did some studies quite recently looking at the behaviour of what happens basically should a user pays be introduced and what that does to illegal dumping. And all the data, so they collected data from about 34 councils, excuse me. And while some councils saw a temporary spike the first 12 months of a user pays being introduced, that did decrease. And I guess they also saw that there was very little correlation between councils that actually have free access and user pays. So, for example, the cost per customer to handle illegally dumped waste in urban areas in southeast Queensland is about $11.50. Here on the Gold Coast, it's about $11 per customer, and we have free entry at the moment.
So in summary, I think we can expect increase in legal dumping. I think we can't avoid that. Again, there's some decent research and experience in what that looks like and how long it takes to return to, let's call it normal. And then some provision in not just city cleaning, but also in law enforcement to follow these things up. I think the disappointing thing for, I guess, someone who lives on the Gold Coast is that despite the fact that we've got 11 WRCs that have traditionally not charged, people still make the choice to dump. Some of the research that I've seen is, and the drivers behind that dumping is because it's easier. And I think there's some ingrained behaviour there that no matter what scenario that we run through, we are still going to be bumping up against that. I think there's some general sort of societal norms out there that do need to move on. I can recall, years ago, how the littering issue and how people are a bit more accepting about throwing stuff out of car windows. Now, it's an anathema to people these days, as it should be. I would like to think that part of the communications around this and some of the experiences we may face as a result of this can start some better conversations around behaviours and some enforcement activity to really sort of take some of these to task. I mean, you can see some of those examples in the photo there. That's actually for a Numbinbar. So that's not necessarily your fly tipping, as the Brits call it around town, but that's certainly an example how some people take advantage of it for commercial purposes, but typically it's just because it's a bit easier and they'll move their problem, their personal problem, as a community problem and therefore a council problem to sort out.
Is that all at the moment you wanted to touch on with regards to illegal dumping?
Look, that's probably a start, but I'm happy to sort of keep discussing this one because it is a concern.
No worries. If we need to circle back, we can. Just next then, I guess, going to Councillor O'Neill, you were next to have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I do acknowledge that there was some community engagement in August, but it was very broad, and I'm not sure that residents actually have would have put two and two together, thinking this was coming to council. The comments that I made at our workshop that Councillor Patterson referred to really refer to having an honest conversation with our residents around this, because I'm sure that the majority of them don't realise the state waste levy situation for a start. And I guess the other question about the state levy, have we got confirmation that it will continue in the form that it has, that we've had it so far, that there will be a 50% reduction in the rebate? Is that been confirmed by the current state government?
Through the chair, we've through Local Queensland, the Government Association, we have representation on their waste subgroup in there, and the advice that we got back through that subgroup from LGRQ was that they've been silent on that at the moment. I guess one observation I would make is that Queensland's is still below some of our southern colleagues in terms of the state. They seem to be on an upward trajectory. I think it would be more broadly quite surprising if the Queensland government didn't follow that national trend. So I've heard no indication that they're going to change the unwinding as yet.
So I just get back to having this honest conversation with our residents. Yeah. And certainly, if we're looking realistically at tip fees, and giving the stats that maybe 2 or 3 trips is the norm, I actually think that we need to ask them, would they prefer a voucher system, or would they prefer the actual levy itself, utility charge increased? I think we need to have that conversation. It's just disingenuous if we don't. I feel very uncomfortable making any sort of decision about this before we do have that conversation with our residents. And I guess we don't really need to have it until budget time anyway. But there's a lot of, there's a lot to unpack here, and we're taking away a lot. And should we be taking all these steps right now? Can we stage some of this? Can we keep some of our WRCs open, especially for those? As I said, we've got customers in Currumbin and Tallebudgera that now are going to be hit with a double whammy. They're going to have their WRC taken away. They don't get a curbside service, but they'll have to pay some levy as well. It just, I just think that we need to consult and not consult on decisions we've made now, consult on what our residents really feel about this, and we need to make them aware of the situation. And that's going to be, it's hard, but I think we have to do that step first.
Through you, Madam Chair, just on the note of engagement, to lift it back up out of Currumbin and back to user pays conversation, when we do engagement through the city, and we do it at varying levels, as councillors are well aware, the most intricate engagement that the city has undertaken involves focus groups, involves community outreach pop-ups, involves a GC Have Your Say. the maximum number we pick up of participants through that ranges around 5,000 to 6,000 people. So when we have a constituent base of about 700,000, our most broadest and thoroughly engaging engagement doesn't even pick up 10% of that. So I think there is a consideration around engagement to understand what level of the population's voices you will hear.
I still have Councillor Doran and then Councillor Gates, but Councillor Wilkinson, yours is directly related to that question.
Correct, and it actually comes back, through you, Chair, to your recommendation that's before us today, where there is noted community outreach. I guess, because I 100% understand Councillor O'Neill's position on this, and to be honest, I have the exact same view to a degree on some of these comments that have been made today. But just in relation to that community outreach, because of, I guess, the way this report's been presented to us, would there be a component within this, captured within this recommendation, and particularly that dot point number 5, whereby we can go to the community in the first instance before any changes are adopted by this council to actually engage them on these particular proposals, which have more or less been born out of previous consultation around our towards zero waste strategy? Is that something that could occur between now and basically budget, which is point number 4 that the council considers this as part of the budget deliberations? Can that community outreach on this specific nature, which I would hope would encompass that education as well as an understanding of the reasons why we've got to this point now, be practical, I guess, from an officer side of things before budget deliberations?
So through you, Madam Chair, if we differentiate between community outreach and community engagement, community outreach is often perceived as your town halls or your community events where an officer and a councillor goes to speak about a change. It typically covers the drivers behind the change. It seeks to understand the micro considerations of the community members and to plan to offset those. Community engagement is have your say to inform a decision. When we do community engagement, the shortest one we've previously stood up took about 3 to 4 months just in development and implementation phase. You then also have about 2 months of analysis to make sure that any free text fields are analysed and categorised properly before you can actually get to a piece that would be readable for councillors. So do I think that's physically possible for community engagement? No. The community outreach, going and supporting those community groups to understand the drivers for change and the micro concerns, yes.
Councillor Doran, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. So, Chris, you said a couple of things about the Merrimack Green Organics pad. I say we in the collective with the Division 8 councillor have had some engagement on this, but I must admit nothing since December, which has been really disappointing considering the views that we expressed collectively about this particular agenda item. And today you've mentioned that often users will take the easiest option in terms of dumping, and you've also said that you desperately want to keep green organics out of landfill. A couple of quotes there. Isn't that in direct contradiction to closing down facilities in a growing city?
Through the Chair, I take your point. It's about making things easy for our customers, but I guess that's a continuum of how easy things are. We still have a large number of drop-and-go facilities within a reasonable drive time, which I believe those customers will make that choice to take it to Mollendina or Reedy Creek rather than sort of dumping those materials. But it is a lower level of service than the temporary arrangements we've had in place. And if we didn't have that sewage treatment plan, I wouldn't see any reason why we'd otherwise look at changing that site as it is.
Well, we do have significant. We have 5 options on there and significant land holdings in that direct area. So I don't accept that it needs to be done. Another question, Chair. 81%, according to the report, support paying less for recycling. Given it's free, was there a conversation about what we're going to pay them to recycle? Or and when you ask those questions in the engagement, was there actually an entire disclosure of what the alternative would be? Would you accept in that same survey paying gate fees? Was that explicitly stated in part of that engagement? And I ask that, Chair, because it's being used to justify these changes.
If I could hand to Christy in terms of the nature of that engagement, but just more broadly, no, we didn't specifically ask that. I am fairly confident that if we ask our customer, do you want to pay a gate fee, they would say no. We have had this conversation with the community, I understand, about 4 or 5 years ago. But again, it's part of that alternative is that we have to cover our costs to run these facilities. What is the best way? I think that's the question we need to put to our customers. What's the best way to do that? Do you want to everybody pay an additional waste utility charge on the rates, or a user pays? So, but I absolutely acknowledge that was not a specific question, and we are trying to, I guess, extrapolate some of those sentiments in that consultation and apply them to these sorts of scenarios.
Through you, Madam Chair, to expand on Councillor Duran's question, all questions developed for community engagement are done so in collaboration with Office of the Mayor. So no, we did not frame the question in that way, but in the 2021 survey, we did frame it that way. We asked residents if they would prefer to pay for what they generated in terms of a waste levy, or whether they would prefer it proportionally applied across the waste management utility charge. In 2021, 69% of residents said that they would prefer it to be paid by the generator. And if we were going to ask the question of the community, it wouldn't be, would you like to pay gate fees? It would be, would you prefer to pay gate fees, or would you prefer an increase in your waste management utility charge?
Because they're the options.
I might ask a question while we're on the topic of the Merrimack Green pad and the discussion about the most convenient method of disposal. So since the introduction of that pad, we've seen the rollout of the green bins.
Yes.
What is the rate of presentation currently for the area around Merrimack for green bins?
I could probably, just in terms of the availability, as part of the green waste curbside expansion, in both of those divisions for properties between 250 square metres and up to 5,000 square metres, they were issued a green organics bin, which provides a curbside option. I grant for mega cleanups, they'll be looking at a blue bag, but in terms of just chipping away, it is an alternative option there. For those customers that don't currently have a green bin and would generate a green waste stream, they are eligible to ask for one. So in that first rollout, we looked at those properties and those standalone residents. So we did miss out on some duplexes who may well have a lawn and a garden, but we would absolutely encourage those customers to apply for a green organics bin, and we will issue one.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to add to the question that you asked, in Division 8, which is Councillor Lacastro's division, 81% of customers with a curbside bin have a green organics bin. So the remainder of those customers can opt in. They typically are in duplexes or what we call horizontal MUDs, so that's your townhouse complexes, Councillor.
I think I still had, so unless you're finished, Chair, I think I still had other questions.
Sure.
And just before I go to my next question, I have a foreshadowed motion that I'd like to put forward, and the officers have it over in the corner. When we talk about the Merrimack Go pad, can you talk to the use of it once you've closed down Mudgeeraba and the impacts that had on the city's cap on that style of waste, and what that effect that had on the city, which demonstrates the use of the facility, please?
Oh, I can talk to when the Merrimack, the Mudgeeraba facility shut. Prior to that, I recall that we set up the green organics. Sorry, just to take a step back. Traditionally, at some of those smaller facilities, we had bins, so customers would pull up with their cars and drop it into a bin, much as you find with the your general waste or your metal bins and those sorts of things, which was really inefficient because we were effectively dragging air up and down the freeway, as opposed to a sort of a compaction scenario that we had on the green waste a drop and go. So we moved to those green waste drop and goes with Pimpamar and a couple of others. And once the Mudgeeraba shut, then obviously those customers were diverted to that existing drop and go at Merrimack. And Councillor, you might want to
just pause there. Just while we're talking about this, it's been quite a number of years since Mudgeeraba had green waste at all. My recollection is it didn't have it when it recently closed. green waste got shut down
Through
multiple years earlier.
Through you, Madam Chair, green organics was removed from all bins across the majority of waste recycling centres in 2020.
Yes.
So that included Madraba,
Yes.
Merrimack,
Sorry.
actually,
Sorry,
Helensvale, Currumbin.
Just in the context of the question, it sounded like what was being proposed was that when Madraba shut, there was a change in green waste drop-offs to Merrimack, but at the time that Madraba closed permanently, there was no green waste at that waste recycling centre at that time. Green waste had discontinued back in 2020. So if we're going to compare like for like, we want to say what happened to Merrimack in 2020 when we stopped doing green waste in Madraba.
The example is we close one, it increases capacity on another, which affected our ability to stick within our limits of that use.
In terms of our licence for that site, we can amend our, I recall we did go through a process of amending the licence at Merrimack to accommodate the volumes that did go there.
Correct. And through you, Madam Chair, we do have new EAs for all our waste recycling centres now, including Merrimack and Helensvale. Kathy is just walking in. Don't know if you want to add to that, Kathy.
Sorry, what's a UDA?
Environmental Authority.
Sorry, you're going to have to say that one at a time.
At the environmental licence for the site, Environmental Authority.
Thank you. Sorry.
I just have one further question after this, Chair, once they're finished answering.
Sorry, first of all, have you got another question?
I think they're answering this question, and then I've got one more.
Sorry, could you just say again, what does UDA stand for?
It's EA, through the chair, it's EA, Environmental Authority, which is basically our permit to undertake recycling activities at our WRCs, waste recycling centres, or our landfills, or treat sewage at our sewage treatment plants.
Okay, thanks.
So, yes, so we've got, back when we came here a lifetime ago, 2023-ish, 2-ish, with the issues at the Merrimack WRC, and essentially our teams worked together to actually get the Environmental Authority amended to remove the 20,000 total tonnage issue on Merrimack itself to allow us to have what we could put through there now.
So you still got
I just have one.
Councillor Doran and then Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Gates. Oh, actually, it's Gates and then Patterson.
This matter has come, according to the history that was in the report, has come to council twice before now, since 2012. My question is, what new information have you got from the last time council did not endorse the implementation of gate fees from today?
Through the chair, I think probably the two key items there around waste levy. I think last time it was taken up, the waste levy was, that delta was not moving. It's on us right now. And the other one is the cost base of the waste business as well, with some of these elements that I spoke about before were certainly not in the situation that we're facing now.
Wouldn't the delta have been known? I mean, we can see on the graph that it's getting bigger in the future. So wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that the council that made its last decision on this a few years ago could foresee what you're referring to there in terms of the gap between the rebate and the levy?
That model, the state government model, certainly was known and presented from what I understand. It may well be a different sense of immediacy that those costs are coming.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Gates, and then Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Castro.
Thanks, Chair. And my apologies, I left the room because the Mayor's away and I had to meet the British High Commissioner on his behalf. So my apologies for leaving. I'm not quite sure how much time has been spent on the voucher system. Were there questions about a potential voucher system?
About 4 hours.
Okay, so I'll watch the replay. I won't revisit that. I think with the reference to the green waste at Merrimack, the question that I have is not the volume as it has eventuated with regard to Madraba, but has there been a decrease since the introduction of the mandatory green bin? Has there been a reduction in the green waste going to Merrimack since we were all distributed a green bin?
Through the chair, the team have some stats around that.
Through you, Madam Chair, we've seen a reduction of about 25% at Merrimack alone since we've introduced the green organics bin.
Okay, I think that's important to note that that is working, so thank you. The only other question that I had at this point, because I'll watch so I don't bore everyone with my stuff now, on page 45 of the report, it lists the residents likely to be impacted by a waste management access charge. And I note that Wongawallan is not mentioned at all. And I would like clarification of that, please, because I'm aware of a setup for bin collection at Welsh's Park for the properties that cannot be accessed by the waste service collection vehicles. I'm not absolutely sure how many of those properties still exist since the most recent contract, but I would like to know. They're not listed at all here, and I don't know whether that's because it's just been overlooked or whether because there is the bin system at Welsh's Park, it's considered that they actually get a collection when they don't. So I don't know what the impact on those residents might be, and I would be grateful for that advice prior to full council, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, we can definitely provide you with an itemised list per division. The snapshot here is residents who are likely to be impacted in a particular area, just noting that we do need to do a quality assurance check on that 893, as some of them are now commercial properties that seem to be misrated.
Well, these would only be residential properties, I'm sure, but if there's an impact, I'd like to know. Thanks.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I remember having conversations about the amount of commercial inappropriate actions. So effectively rocking up, looking like a resident, being able to get through as a resident, but they're commercial. Have you got any sense of how much that impacts?
Through the chair, we don't have this, statistics around there, and I know that's not exactly what you're asking, but it's more about a sense. It's still it's still a significant problem. I think part of the problem is that particularly over, for example, the period we've been through over the summer months, where we get these really peak visitation rates. You know, the volume of people coming through those facilities. Is quite extraordinary. Sometimes I wonder where this stuff actually comes from. But in those situations, the operators there, and from a customer experience point of view, it's about how do we minimise queuing time, how do we get people in and out so they're not sort of sitting in queues. And in that scenario, particularly in those times of year, there's even less ability to scrutinise and question, because it is a question and answer game at times. People will turn up in a commercial vehicle and it's genuinely home waste, but other times I might use that vehicle to bring in other waste. So we put our people in a really difficult position. One solution, I'm not sort of suggesting this is in any way a recommendation as part of this, but in certain jurisdictions, a tonne of waste or a carload of waste is a carload of waste, whether it's commercial or residential, because it takes up the same space in a landfill, and charges are set accordingly. Now, we're not contemplating that as part of that, but that really is the only solution to that scenario. It's just another wicked problem that we face, but I would suggest it is common. And our officers are instructed that if they are challenging people and they are facing aggression or threats, that they back down and let them drop and go. We do report that through our Done Safe sort of system if there's the aggression element there. And we are working, we had a decent workshop last week with city laws and a number of other stakeholders outside of the waste business to say, how can we address the aggression? But as a knock-on of that is how do we actually follow up and stop these guys from just doing it again and again? We do have serial offenders that just keep coming and dumping.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to the question that you asked, Councillor Patterson, From a behavioural perspective, there's two types of commercial misuse. So there's your commercials who come in representing themselves as residential customers, and then there's your commercials who direct the residents to take the waste in themselves. House renovations are a great example. So they'll say, we'll give you a reduced fee if you take it in for free. While we can't speak to the percentage of commercials who are coming in 3 or 4 times a year, what we do know is that at least 3% of visitors are coming in 14 plus times a year. So that is where I would say you can definitely say that is commercial misuse.
Thank you.
I've just got a comment on that based on what you mentioned before, where you said the options that you can put to our ratepayers are you pay for your user pay or you increase in rates. But it doesn't occur to me that that's what we're actually talking about, because we're not talking about user pay, we're talking about pay for number of trips. But the cost to us is not how many times people show up, it's about the landfill. And again, we've got a problem with commercial operators, so I would have thought there's 3 options. One is pay for the number of trips, 2, increase rates, or 3, actually pay for fair share, which means commercials also paying for their weight. So it's not a question, but it's just clarifying it more for me. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, though, just to offer clarity on the commercial element, since 2019-2020 financial year, commercial operators have paid the waste levy. So they have paid it both via their rates and also through commercial charges. When we talk about commercial misuse, it's not about putting in a fee for commercials. That one already exists. It's the difficulty with which we have in identifying hidden commercial customers.
Yeah, I suppose, but if through you, Chair, my point is, if you don't do what other councils are doing and you pay based on weight, it isn't user pays. You know, a pensioner might go with their clothes and they've got one box that goes, and that might be an outing that they like to do every 2 weeks. They pay the same as someone, you know, it's not about trips, it's about weight. And there's a reason why those other councils are doing that. So you don't need to, okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, if you'd like to look at that option, we could drive residential customers to our Weybridge sites. So that's Mollendina and Reedy Creek. And we could convert our non-Weybridge sites to recycling only. That way the free access for customers is easily identified for them.
Okay. Just one other thing, if I may.
Is it a question?
Yeah. And it relates, because what's coming at us does occur somewhat murky. And again, relating to that workshop, the question is about how we make that. It may actually be a question that we need to raise within governance, because this process of having councillor workshops before is relatively new in terms of informing it as much as we are. But there's nothing documented. There's no resolution out of it. When we come out of it thinking there was unanimous agreement in that feedback about something, then we're told, oh no, but the other team didn't think that. We're not told anything. We're told that that time and allocation we put to that feedback would determine this report, and it doesn't. So it's just something we've got to consider, because otherwise we get reports which aren't
Councillor Patterson,
we
there was a question in there?
No, there isn't.
You bluffed me. Councillor Lacastra.
Thank you. Through the Chair, just a couple of very quick questions. I know the Chair actually asked you what the presentation rate was for the green bins in the Merrimack area, as I say, so across Division 8 and Division 11, and they are listed here. What is the average presentation in the green bins across the city? I mean, I'd like to ask for, say, you know, Helensvale, Jacobswell, whatever, but let's just say the average across the city.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's about 60%.
Okay, so therefore, the average rate for Merrimack, Mudgeeraba, Robina, and all the Carrara, all listed here, are basically the same, so it's the same across the city. So to actually put these in here to say there's capacity in the green bins, one would say that doesn't that mean that there is still capacity in the waste bins, the green waste bins across the city, because the average is the same? Okay, but are we looking at closing down any other green pads, even though we have the same capacity as anyone else?
Through the chair, we're not contemplating that, and I understand the logic, but I think the scenario at Merrimack is different from the other green pads.
It certainly is, yeah, but we'll get to that later, yeah. Okay, but, okay, the other question is, has there been any reduction in green waste diversion to the other green pads in the city? We mentioned the question was asked by Councillor Gates about the reduction, and you said there's 25%, and that's listed in the report in Appendix G, I think, from memory. So has there been any reduction in,
Through you, Madam Chair, we've seen a reduction of about 500,000 visitations across the entire network. I guess for this report, we looked specifically at Merrimack and that catchment.
Yeah, but the question is, why do we look specifically at Merrimack if it's the same across the city? So to actually say, look, we don't need it because there's a reduction of 25%, we don't need it because there's still a 40% average capacity in your bin, when there's a 40% average capacity in every bin across the city. And so what percentage has the green waste reduced, green waste to green pad since across the city? Is it similar to the 25%?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to harken back to Chris's previous comment, which is that we're not deciding or we're not recommending to close green waste from Merrimack because of the lower utilisation. We're advising of what the cost of replacing that service is.
I know the reason why we're doing that, but as I say, we can get to that later. But my specific question, regardless of Merrimack, we're talking about that this report is actually called the water waste, the waste network plan.
Yep.
So I think this whole conversation is about the waste network. So it's very, very easy to pick out places and give statistics without actually giving other places and other statistics, because we're talking about a network plan. So I'm asking, the question is, what is the percentage of reduction in green waste to other WRCs which have green waste pads?
Madam Chair, through you, Councillor Lacastra, I think that's a really fair comment. This paper is termed the whole waste network plan. The positioning of the options that have been presented are around the key levers we believe are most useful to resolving the problem that we're trying to resolve here. Completely take your point around your need to look at the big picture, and perhaps for the next papers that we provide to Council on this matter, we can provide you that fuller picture.
Yeah, sorry, it still doesn't answer the question of what is the percentage reduction in green waste that's going to WRCs that have green pads. If it's 25% at Merrimack, what is it for other WRCs that have green?
Through the chair, we can certainly provide you with that information. I just don't think we have that breakdown at hand. One observation I would make is that we wouldn't even be contemplating shutting down that pad if we didn't have the expansion of the sewage treatment plant. So I guess the tension is, how much is the city willing to pay for a replacement, and what's the opportunity cost of that? So, that's the number, I think, our dilemma.
I understand that, but as I say, we'll get into that in debate. So, all right, thank you.
May I ask, because we're on the topic of the network plan and strategically where these green pads are placed, given some of us weren't around when we had the Helensvale closure, can we talk about the intent behind that, and whether seeking to retain Merrimack would be inconsistent with what we were trying to achieve with something like the Helensvale closure, for example?
Sure. I can touch on it through the councillor. So Councillor Tozer raised that scenario that we had a number of years ago, whereby we had a number of WRCs where green organics was placed in the bins. So those bins, the customers would self-haul, and they'd back their car up and they'd drop them in the big bins.
So when you say word bin, we're talking about shipping containers.
Yes, so those huge steel bins that...
There was big shipping containers in the waste transfer station. They weren't... I don't mean to
they're not
change
really
correct,
bins,
but when you're using the word bins, people think curbside bins, and it's just confusing. So we had shipping containers that we put green waste into, and they got picked up by a truck and taken to a place where green waste got processed.
That's correct.
Okay, they're really, really big bins.
Through you, Madam Chair, the technical term is roll-on, roll-off bins. So they're between, we have a combination of 30 metre and 60 metre bins across the network, and the majority of green waste used to be collected in 60 metre roll-on, roll-off bins. Very similar to shipping containers with the top cut off.
And the change was really around efficiencies because we had to move those bins, which were not compacted, so they were pretty much moving largely air up and down to these processing places. So we'd have, I think, about a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio. So, for example, if we take an example of a green waste drop and go pad, where we grind that waste on site, moved into a large truck and moved that off, we are getting a really good payload out of that. Whereas if we just took those ones, for example, Helensvale and Merrimack, prior to that, we were really quite inefficient, so moving a lot of uncompacted waste. So that change was really about an efficiency approach, and drove us down to the direction of green waste drop and go pads. Rather than the bins. In terms of where we located those green drop and go pads was a question of space. Helensvale didn't have that space, and we always saw Helensvale and Merrimack, from what I understand, as sort of peer facilities, if you like. So having that temporary one did throw that out of kilter to a degree. But again, there was an opportunity there that we took to provide an additional level of customer service, and also to acknowledge the closure of Mudgera Bar. That does assist those customers as well and gives them a choice rather than going to Reedy Creek.
Through you, Madam Chair, and just to add to what Chris has already said, I guess based on that decision to remove green organics from waste recycling centres, we had commissioned an independent consultant to actually look at what our waste network should look like. That consultant actually advised that we should have 5 centres throughout the city, 3 premium and 2 small centres. So obviously the consultant advised we should build the premium centre in Pimpama, which we're doing. That centre will have a green organics pad. And one of the other recommendations was to remove green organics from bins. So we made that change in 2020, and the actual percentage and the tonnage of green organics has continued to increase across the city and the network since we've done that.
Councillor Gates.
Thank you very much. I'm just having a look at my most recent rates notice, and there's a waste management charge issued.
Yes.
Half yearly?
Half yearly, yes.
And so it's $200, so $400 a year.
$355 a year, I believe, it nets out at.
How much?
I thought it was around $355 was the current annual charge.
I think it's close to $400. But anyway, is it intended, if user pays is introduced, that waste sustainability charge will decrease?
The waste utility charge will decrease.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to introduce user pays, will that charge remain as high as it is, or will there be a corresponding reduction to that charge? And on the rates notice, there's also a waste management utility charge, which is the state component, but that's not being charged at the moment because the rebate is covering the cost, but as the rebate reduces, it's likely that will go up, isn't it?
That's correct. As it unwinds, we have to source that.
So not only will there be user pays at the gate, but there'll be, it's intended that the waste charge will remain the same, the service charge, and the utility charge will increase. So there'll be a triple whammy.
Essentially, Councillor, we will be bringing to Special Budget Committee the updated version of our full cost pricing model, which breaks down every cost for running the waste business, and that feeds in what our pricing needs to be. Okay. Based on those cost increases, we will need to look at how those increasing costs are dispersed. So I'm not in any way suggesting that if we pay or apply a gate fee, as we've indicated today, that will freeze the waste utility charge. Those two, how we actually make up that mix, will be a decision for council based on that full cost pricing model, now that we have a really good model to understand what it actually costs to run that sustainable business.
I think we really have a strong question to put to the state about whether they're going to reimburse us better than was originally suggested, because otherwise the residents seem like they're going to be hit. So I don't know. I haven't read the foreshadowed motion in full, but I hope it has something about getting the state to reconfirm what the reimbursement to council will be since they introduced that charge. Thank you.
Is there an opportunity to discuss the likelihood or like how that could occur at this stage?
And through the chair, you're referring to how we could advise.
Well, I guess my understanding is that this is a very deliberate lever that is forcing local councils to make these hard decisions. So I don't think that the friction back from us balking at that would likely be received well. But I mean, you're more intricately of an understanding of what the lever's intent is and whether providing a greater rebate is going to achieve what the state is trying to achieve.
Madam Chair, yes, that's correct, and that is the intent of the state levy policy, as you've been advised. We can continue to advocate on behalf of the community for improvements to, how that cost flows down to the community. Nevertheless, this is the financial position and the challenge that we find ourselves in now. Effectively what we've put to you today, options for consideration for special budget, is on the principle of user pays. And so, as much as possible, that's the principle that we're working to as we're looking at financial models to address that financial challenge imposed by the state.
And through the chair, I could add to that in terms of that broader picture. The Queensland Waste Management and Resource Recovery Strategy is that end goal, and a tenet of that is how do we increase resource recovery rates. So this is effectively a mechanism that the state government applies to disincentivise customers directing material to landfill and to increase resource recovery rates, both customers and councils, to facilitate that. So it is the unwinding of that is consistent with that policy, and as I've noted earlier, I have in my discussions with the Local Government Association of Queensland and some connections in the Waste Management Working Group, we haven't had any indication of state government contemplating changes. They've been silent on that. That doesn't mean they're not talking about it, but certainly the general manager levels have not been advised that they're contemplating changes to the waste levy rate and trajectory or the remissions trajectory.
Because Councillor Gates wasn't in the room, and I would actually like them repeated again anyway because they're so powerful, we talked through the 2025, 26 and then the two subsequent years if we weren't to move to a different model of the cost increase projections to the waste utility charge. Would you mind repeating them?
Certainly, through the chair, some of the modelling that we have been doing based on the cost of the operations of the WRCs, if we couldn't recover those through a gate charge for residential customers, that's a portion. Obviously, the commercial customers pay levy plus the gate fee which goes to council. We would need to offset that somewhere else. Our modelling suggests that in 25-26, the transfer of that would result in a increase of the waste utility charge, or a request to increase the waste utility charge to all those ratepayers for about $55, and that may well increase based on our modelling to 80 the year after, and then potentially 100 plus the year after that.
More questions? Do I have? We got to everyone. Oh no, Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I know this is long, but just a query on, I guess, the optimisation of the landfill area. I've been to Reedy Creek, and I know you go through the Way Bridge, and you might go through there and go to green waste, dump that off, then chuck the rest out into landfill. But when I'm there, you know, there are some staff around directing you to a bay and or cleaning, but I guess it's not really policed as such, or there's no one really monitoring. And I've observed that some, you might even chuck trees in there, they might chuck cardboard in there, but there is other recycling areas there that they could sort of filter those. So I'm just really interested in, before we sort of go to the gate fees, you know, what can we optimise that component more to really, I guess, staff policing or limit so much going into landfill at the site?
Through the chair, look, that's a really good observation question. This is an ongoing challenge we have with customers. And we do ask our staff to not just direct customers, but assist them and encourage them. Unfortunately, we do get scenarios pretty regularly. It's a difficult job where people will just say, "Nah, what are you going to do about it?" Now, I think at change points, and we do this over Christmas periods, we do have security officers there, VIP, to, someone in a uniform is a bit more persuasive at times. We know now that we've got protective services officers in our libraries, and I think certainly if we go down this path, we would have to have some protective services officers at those WRCs for a period of time, certainly during transition. But again, we have this challenge with our workers, that there are limits to what we can ask them to do in terms of enforcement and getting into those arguments, because any member of the public can go in there and some of them behave pretty appallingly at times.
I'm awfully sorry, but I understood when Councillor Tozer said 4 hours, there was a suggestion that there'd been discussion about the voucher system. But I understand that maybe there hasn't been much discussion about the potential of a voucher system. And I feel that that's important for me anyway to have an understanding, because I read in the report that I think most people perhaps use our service, our tips twice a year. And I don't think there would be such huge opposition should there be a voucher system that provided a couple of free vouchers, and that the rest of the community who use it much more regularly pay. I have no problem with the user pays as long as those people who use that service just a couple of times a year are still able to. And I think I also read that there were issues with illegal presentation of vouchers, and I'm not sure if it was this report or at another time, but presentation of vouchers and a black market for vouchers. But is there not a way that a voucher system could be established without a huge cost on presentation of a rates notice? Or surely electronically we could manage that in this day and age?
I can touch on that through the chair. Certainly, we've had some discussions around vouchers and done a lot of research on how we could do this. So we've looked at options, including use the City app as a sort of electronic one. And obviously, if we could get that working slickly for a customer, so they're not fumbling around and frustrated at WRCs and people who aren't comfortable with that sort of technology are taken account for. We've also looked as part of our new Weybridge software to ensure that that's got a module that we could potentially turn on as another way we could do that. There are complications with the electronic systems in terms of which system talks to the other, so having a full view of that customer. To your point around paper vouchers, there certainly are ways that you can deal with some of those circumstances like the secondary market. And you are right, one of those is a rates notice. So, for example, if you had 2 QR codes on a rates notice, or if there's 2 rates notices a year, you put one on the rates notice and the attending customer scans that in. Again, there is a sort of a source of tension there potentially if they've got the rate notices, but we'd have to set some rules around that and deal with the complaints that come around that. But there are different techniques so that we don't have a system where you've got a voucher you can sell on, you can photocopy, and all those other permutations that people run with.
Well, I think we should be exploring something of that
And we
nature.
certainly have, yes. Can I make one more comment on that? The only concern with voucher programs, Councillor, is that they certainly do capture additional revenue for the people who are attending 14 times a year. The majority of people that either go none or 1 or even 2, the revenue from that therefore is removed, and the costs that we need to run those centres need to be found somewhere else. So that effectively, so for example, in 25-26, if I mentioned that figure of $55, if we didn't go down user pays, if we do go down a voucher with a couple of vouchers, for example, 2 or 3 vouchers, it would offset that revenue and still mean that we would need to raise that waste utility charge, and our modelling I think is around $44. around that one. So that's the downside
Or
of a voucher.
you could charge the people who are using the service 10 times a year more money.
Yep, that's another lever we can play with as well.
Councillor Doran.
I just have one last question. It was before my time, but I remember last year, Chris, we talked a little bit around. I'm going to be careful because we're in open, but there's a particular contract that we had some discussions about last year, and I'll leave it at that. I understand one of the intent behind the council's original decision was there'd be some savings that could be attributed towards the levy that we're now forced to deal with, or being forced to deal with, or being asked to deal with. I don't know if you can answer the question I'm trying to answer, but if there was those savings achieved, have they been allocated to the intent? And Chair, I acknowledge that the question I've just asked is going to be quite cryptic to a lot of people, and if you can't answer because we're in open, I fully accept that.
I can provide an answer to that one in open, in general terms, if that satisfies you. Yeah. If not, we can potentially look at that other option, but that's a procedural matter. Certainly, one of the intents of a contract that we're operating at the moment is to increase resource recovery rates. That's an absolute intent of that one, and part of that is standing up additional lines of recycled material. So we've spoken earlier about mattresses. We want to get that out of our landfills and then minimise the exposure associated with mattresses with the waste levy. Expand our e-waste offerings. So at the moment it's TVs and computers and peripherals. We want to go further with that, and there's potential to go hard waste, which is couches and things that get ground up. There's facilities in Brisbane and closer to home that can use that as effectively a coal substitute for cement kilns and those sorts of things. An intention of that and a continued intention of our contracts that allow us to pull those levers is to push those as hard as we possibly can. I can say that we have a strategic effectively the board meeting of one of the bigger contracts straight after this, which will be getting a presentation on where they are at with those ones, and we'll be pretty pointed in terms of we need to get on with this to again use that as a lever that the city can pull to minimise the exposure of the city and our customers to waste levy. So certainly, and that's something that we're absolutely focused on. Is that too cryptic? I'm sorry.
I'm happy to move into close if you'd like to go into further depth, Councillor Doran. It's a really important question. Would you like to move that we move into close?
I would, thank you.
Okay, and have I got a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. All in favour? Excellent, and we're live streaming off, moving into close to discuss a private contract. Is that sufficient?
Hold on.
turn the live streaming back on. Thank you for those following along at home. What we're going to do now, because we are skimming dangerously close to the start of another committee, we are going to seek an adjournment so that we can commence the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, and then we will recommence the meeting after that. So someone to move that adjournment. Thank you, Councillor Young. Seconded, Councillor Wilkinson. All in favour. And that recommendation is carried, and we will see you soon.